Hello, my friend. Close your eyes for a moment. Take a slow breath in. Now breathe out, nice and slow. Good. Tonight, you are not alone. Tonight, I will sit with you, and I will tell you 10 stories. 10 quiet stories. 10 gentle stories. Stories to help your mind rest, and stories to help your English grow. Slowly, softly, while you sleep. You do not need to understand every word. You do not need to try hard. You only need to listen. Just listen, like you are listening to rain on a window or to waves on a beach. Let the words move over you, like warm water. Every story tonight is simple. Every story uses easy words, short sentences, slow English. The kind of English that feels like a soft blanket, not a hard test. Some of these stories are a little bit mysterious. Some of them have a small secret inside. Some of them have a little bit of magic. But do not worry. Every story tonight ends softly. Every story tonight ends safely. Nothing here will scare you. Nothing here will keep you awake. These stories are made to carry you, slowly, gently, down into sleep. So make yourself comfortable. Turn off the bright light. Pull the blanket over your shoulders. Let your body sink into the bed. We will travel together tonight. We will visit a small village by the sea. We will walk through a quiet forest at night. We will meet an old man with a kind face. We will follow a little dog through empty streets. We will sit inside a lighthouse while the wind sings outside. Every story is a small world. Every small world is safe. You can enter each one and rest inside it and let it hold you until morning. Are you ready? Good. Let us begin the first story. Chapter 1. The Lighthouse Keeper's Secret. Far away, on a small rocky island, there was a tall white lighthouse. The lighthouse stood alone, above the gray sea. Every night, its light turned slowly in the dark, round and round, round and round. Ships far away could see the light, and they knew the rocks were near. An old man lived in the lighthouse. His name was Tomas. Tomas was 70 years old. He had white hair and kind eyes. His hands were rough, like old wood, because he worked outside every day, in the wind and the salt air. Tomas lived alone. He did not have a wife. He did not have children near him. He had only the sea, the wind, and the birds. Every morning he walked down the stone steps to the small dock. Every evening he climbed back up, 120 steps, to light the lamp. The villagers on the mainland liked Tomas. Sometimes, a young fisherman named Reuben visited the island in his small wooden boat. Reuben brought bread, milk, and letters. Tomas always gave Reuben a cup of hot tea, and they sat together, looking at the sea. One evening, Reuben came to the island later than usual. The sky was dark orange, and the wind was strong. "Tomas," said Reuben, "the sea is getting rough. I should go home soon." "Stay for tea first," said Tomas. "The sea can wait a little." They sat inside the small kitchen. The wind pushed against the windows. Reuben looked at Tomas's face. He saw something new there, something quiet, something like a secret. "Tomas," said Reuben slowly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," said Tomas. "Why do you live here, all alone? Every year, I ask you to move to the village. Every year, you say no. Why?" Tomas was quiet for a moment. He looked out of the window, at the dark sea. "I will tell you," said Tomas. "But first, drink your tea. It is a long story." Reuben smiled and drank his tea. He liked long stories. "When I was young," said Tomas, "I was not a lighthouse keeper. I was a sailor. I traveled on big ships, across the whole ocean. I saw many countries. I saw many storms." "I did not know that," said Reuben. "Nobody in the village knows," said Tomas. "One night, many years ago, my ship was caught in a terrible storm. The waves were as tall as houses. The wind screamed like a wild animal. We could not see anything. We were lost." Reuben leaned forward. He almost forgot his tea. "All the other sailors were afraid," Tomas continued. "I was afraid too, but then, far away, I saw a small light. A tiny light, blinking in the black night. It was this lighthouse. The old keeper before me, a man named Anders, kept the light burning, even in that terrible storm." "He saved your ship," said Reuben quietly. "Yes," said Tomas. "Because of that light, our captain found the safe way between the rocks. We did not die that night. Every man on that ship lived, because one old man, alone on a small island, did not let his light go out." Tomas looked down at his hands. "After that storm, I could not forget the light," he said. "I understood something important. A small light, in a big dark world, can save many lives." I decided, that night, that one day, I would be that light for someone else. So you became a lighthouse keeper, said Reuben. Yes. When old Anders became too old to climb the stairs, I came here. That was 40 years ago. I never left. Outside, the wind grew louder. The waves crashed against the rocks. Reuben looked worried. Tomas, the storm is getting stronger. I really must go now. Tomas stood up and walked to the window. He looked at the black clouds moving across the sky. Wait, he said. Look at the sea, Reuben. Look carefully. Reuben looked. Far out on the water, he could see the lights of a large ship moving slowly through the storm. That ship does not know these waters, said Tomas. The rocks near this island are very dangerous. If they come too close, they could crash. Tomas moved quickly. For an old man, he was surprisingly fast. He climbed the stone stairs, 120 steps, up to the top of the lighthouse. Reuben followed him, his heart beating fast. At the top, the great lamp was already turning, sending its light out into the storm. But Tomas checked everything carefully. He checked the oil, he checked the glass, he made sure the light was strong and clear. Why are you checking it again? Asked Reuben. The light is already on. Because tonight, said Tomas, someone's life depends on this light being perfect. I will not take any chances. They watched together, through the thick glass, as the great light swept across the dark water. Around and around it turned, cutting through the rain and the wind. Slowly, very slowly, the big ship changed direction. It moved away from the dangerous rocks. It moved into the safe, deep water. Reuben let out a long breath. They saw it, he said. They saw the light. Yes, said Tomas softly. They saw it. They stood together in silence, watching the ship's lights grow smaller and smaller, safely moving away into the night. Now do you understand, said Tomas, why I stay here, why I never leave, not even for one night? Reuben nodded slowly. You are still saving people, just like that man saved you. Every night, said Tomas. Somewhere out there, someone is lost in the dark. Someone is afraid. My light cannot stop the storm, but it can show them the way home. The storm slowly became quieter. The wind softened. The rain became gentle. You should stay here tonight, said Tomas. The sea is still too rough for your small boat. Reuben agreed. He slept that night in a small room in the lighthouse, listening to the wind outside, and the slow, steady turning of the great light above him. In the morning, the sea was calm again. The sun rose golden over the water. Reuben stood on the dock, ready to sail home. Thank you, Tomas, he said, for the tea, for the story, and for the light. Tomas smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Sail safely, my friend. And remember, if you are ever lost, look for the light. It will always be here. Reuben sailed away across the calm morning sea. Behind him, on the small rocky island, the lighthouse stood tall and quiet in the soft morning sun, resting now, waiting patiently for the next night, when its light would turn again, faithfully, for anyone lost in the dark. And somewhere, far out on the ocean, a young sailor on a large ship remembered a small light in a terrible storm, and felt, for the first time in his life, that the world was a little less frightening than he thought. The lighthouse keeper's secret was simple. It was not magic, it was not gold. It was only this: one small light, kept burning with love, night after night, year after year, can be enough to save a life. And that is enough for one story tonight. Let your mind rest here, on that small island, with the sound of gentle waves, and a light turning softly in the dark. Let us stay a little longer in this quiet place, before we move to the next story. Days passed on the small island. The sea changed its colors, from gray to blue to silver, again and again, like it was breathing slowly. Tomas kept his simple routine. Every morning he checked the lamp. Every afternoon he cleaned the great glass windows at the top of the tower, so the light could shine clearly, without any dust or dirt to block it. Every evening, as the sun went down, he climbed the 120 steps, slowly, one at a time, and lit the lamp for the night. Sometimes, in the quiet afternoons, Tomas sat outside his small house, on an old wooden chair, and watched the birds. White seabirds flew above the water, calling to each other in high, thin voices. Tomas liked to listen to them. He said their voices sounded like old songs, songs from a language nobody remembered anymore. One evening, a young girl came with Reuben on the boat. Her name was Elena, and she was Reuben's niece. She was only 10 years old, and she had never seen a lighthouse before. Her eyes were wide as she looked up at the tall white tower. "Is it true," Elena asked, "that the light can be seen very, very far away?" "Yes," said Tomas, smiling. "On a clear night, sailors far out at sea can see this light, even when they cannot see the island at all." "How does it work?" she asked. Tomas took her hand gently and led her up the stairs. They climbed slowly, step by step, so the little girl would not get tired. At the top, Elena looked at the great lamp with its huge glass lens, shining and clean. "This glass," said Tomas, "is a special kind of glass. It is shaped in circles, like the rings inside a tree. It takes one small flame and makes it very, very strong. It sends the light out, far across the water, in a straight beam, like an arrow made of light." Elena watched the lamp with wonder in her eyes. "When I am afraid of the dark," she whispered, "I will think of this light. I will think that somewhere there is always a light burning for someone." Tomas smiled softly at her words. "That is a good thing to remember," he said. "The dark is never as big as it seems. If you remember that somewhere, a light is waiting." That night, Elena and Ruben stayed again, because the tide was low and it was safer to wait. Elena fell asleep early, wrapped in a warm blanket, listening to the slow, steady sound of the sea outside her window. She dreamed of light moving across dark water, turning and turning, patient and gentle, like a lullaby made of light instead of sound. Outside, Tomas sat by the lamp, as he did every night, watching the darkness, ready to help anyone who might need his small, faithful light. The years continued to pass this way, slow and steady, like the turning of the great lamp, and though Tomas grew older, his light never once went out. If you ever find yourself awake at night, feeling small in the darkness, remember Tomas and his lighthouse. Remember that somewhere, in some quiet corner of the world, a small light is turning steadily through the night, patient and warm, waiting to guide someone safely home. And now, that light can be for you too. Let it turn slowly in your mind, round and round, gentle and warm, until sleep finds you softly. Let us return, for a while longer, to the small island, and to Tomas, before we move on. 10 years passed after the night of the great storm. Tomas grew a little older, a little slower on the stairs, but his heart remained exactly the same. Every evening, he still climbed the 120 steps, one at a time, resting sometimes halfway, breathing slowly, before continuing upward toward the great lamp. One winter, a new visitor arrived on the island. He was a young man named Petter, sent by the government office on the mainland. Petter wore a clean uniform and carried a small folder full of papers. "Mr. Tomas," Petter said politely, standing at the bottom of the lighthouse stairs, "I am here to inform you that the lighthouse will soon be modernized. A new electric light will be installed, one that turns automatically, controlled from the mainland. You will no longer need to climb these stairs every night." Tomas listened quietly, his face calm, though something flickered gently behind his eyes. "When will this happen?" he asked. "Within the year," said Petter. "It is a great improvement. Much safer, much more reliable than an old man climbing stairs in every kind of weather." Tomas nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "Progress is often a good thing." That night, Tomas climbed the stairs as always, but he climbed them more slowly than usual, pausing longer at each small window, looking out at the dark sea below. When he reached the top, he sat for a long while beside the great lamp, watching it turn, listening to its quiet, steady hum. Ruben visited a few days later, bringing bread and tea as always. He noticed immediately that something weighed on his old friend's mind. "What troubles you, Tomas?" he asked gently, as they sat together in the small kitchen. Tomas told him about Petter's visit, about the new electric light, about the coming changes. "That should be good news," said Ruben carefully. "You have worked so hard for so many years. Perhaps it is time to rest." "Perhaps," said Tomas quietly. "But this light has been my whole life, Ruben. Every night for 40 years I have carried it up those stairs with my own hands, my own care. I worry that a machine, however reliable, will not carry the same attention, the same love." Ruben thought about this for a long moment. "Tell me," he finally said, "does the ship far out at sea know, or care, whether the light was lit by a man's hands or by a machine? Does it matter to the sailor lost in the storm, as long as the light guides him safely home?" Tomas was quiet, considering this. "Perhaps," Ruben continued gently, "your love for this light does not disappear when the machine takes over the lighting. Perhaps it simply changes form. You could still walk these stairs, still watch the light turn, still care for this place, even if your hands no longer strike the match each evening. Slowly, over the following months, as workers arrived to install the new electric system, Tomas found that Ruben's words held some truth. He remained on the island, walking the stairs each evening out of habit and love, watching now as the light turned on by itself, glowing bright and steady without needing his hands at all. At first this felt strange to him, almost sad, but slowly he began to notice something new. Without the daily work of lighting the lamp, he had more time. He spent afternoons teaching young Elena, now a teenager, how to read the weather in the shape of the clouds. He wrote letters to old sailor friends he had not spoken with in years. He even began, slowly, teaching Petter, the young government worker, how to understand the old ways of the sea, the things no machine could measure, the particular smell of an approaching storm, the specific color of water that meant dangerous rocks below the surface. "You still have so much to give," Ruben told him one evening, as they watched the new electric light turn smoothly above them. "The lamp no longer needs your hands, but this island, this sea, this whole way of life, still needs your heart and your memory." Tomas smiled at these words, feeling, for the first time since Petter's visit, a quiet sense of peace. Years later, when Tomas finally grew too old even to climb the stairs at all, he sat each evening in his wooden chair outside the small house, watching the light turn steadily above him, exactly as it always had, exactly as it always would, long after his own hands had grown too tired to carry a single match. And when young sailors, safe now because of a light that no longer needed him at all, sometimes visited the island to thank the old lighthouse keeper they had heard stories about, Tomas welcomed them warmly and told them, always, the very same lesson Ruben had once gently taught him, that love, once given fully to something, never truly disappears, even when the shape of our work changes around us. It simply finds new, quiet ways to keep shining. There is one more small memory from the lighthouse worth sharing before we move on. Long after Tomas had passed away peacefully, in his own small bed, with the sound of the sea outside his window exactly as he had always loved, the island did not fall silent. Elena, now a grown woman with children of her own, had never forgotten the lighthouse, or the gentle old keeper who once showed her how a small flame could become a powerful, guiding light. She returned one summer, many years later, bringing her own young son, a curious boy named Theo, to see the lighthouse for the very first time. "This is where I learned something important," she told him, standing at the bottom of the stone stairs, looking up at the tall white tower gleaming in the afternoon sun. "An old man named Tomas taught me that even the smallest light, cared for faithfully, can guide someone safely through the darkest storm." Theo looked up at the tower with wide, curious eyes. "Can we climb it?" he asked eagerly. Elena smiled, taking his small hand gently in hers. "Yes," she said. "Let us climb together, slowly, one step at a time, just as I once did." They climbed the 120 steps together, Elena pointing out small details along the way, exactly as Tomas once had for her. The worn grooves in the stone, from countless footsteps over many decades, the small windows offering glimpses of the endless blue sea below, the quiet, patient hum of the great lamp, waiting faithfully at the top. When they finally reached the top, Theo pressed his small hands against the cool glass, staring out at the wide, endless ocean stretching before him. "Someday," Elena said softly, kneeling beside her son, "when you feel lost, or afraid, or unsure which way to go, remember this lighthouse, and remember that somewhere, always, a small, patient light is waiting to guide you gently home." Theo nodded solemnly, though his young mind could not yet fully grasp the deep wisdom held gently within his mother's words. But like a small seed planted carefully in patient soil, her words settled quietly within him, waiting patiently themselves, for the right season to slowly bloom into understanding. One further small detail about the lighthouse deserves a quiet mention before we move on. Visitors to the island, even many years after Tomas had passed, often noticed a peculiar thing about the small keeper's house at the base of the tower. Its window always seemed freshly cleaned, its small garden always neatly tended, though no one, technically, was assigned to care for it any longer, since the light itself had long since become fully automatic. Theo, Elena's curious son, grew up hearing this small mystery from local fishermen, who spoke of it fondly, almost affectionately, as though the island itself remembered how to care for something once loved so deeply. Perhaps, some of the old fishermen like to say, a place cared for with such patient devotion for so many decades simply learns, in its own quiet way, how to keep a small part of that care alive, long after the person who gave it has gone. It is, of course, only an old fisherman's tale. But standing at the base of that tall white tower, watching its light turn steadily above the calm evening sea, it was easy, even for the most practical visitor, to believe it, at least a little. There is one last small thought about the lighthouse worth sharing before we move on tonight. Sailors who passed that island over the many decades often said the same curious thing to each other, passed quietly from captain to captain, like an old sea superstition that nobody quite wanted to question too closely. That the light from that particular lighthouse seemed, somehow, warmer than other lights along the coast. Not brighter exactly, nor stronger. Simply warmer, in a way that was difficult to explain, but easy to feel, especially on the coldest, darkest nights, when a lost ship needed guidance most. Perhaps it was only the salt air, or the particular angle of the old glass lens, catching the light just so. Or perhaps, as the old fishermen like to say, some things, cared for faithfully enough, for long enough, simply carry a little of that care forward, quietly, into whatever they continue to give the world, long after the hands that first tended them have gone still. Chapter 2. The Little Dog and the Long Road Home. In a small town, at the edge of a quiet forest, there lived a little dog named Bramble. Bramble was small and brown, with soft, floppy ears and a short tail that never stopped moving. He belonged to a boy named Milo, who was 8 years old. Milo and Bramble did everything together. They walked to school together in the morning. They played in the garden after lunch. They slept together every night. Bramble curled up at the end of Milo's bed, warm and happy. One autumn afternoon, Milo's family went to visit their grandmother, who lived in a small village on the other side of the forest. They took the car, and of course, Bramble came too, sitting happily in the back seat, his nose pressed against the window. When they arrived, Milo's grandmother had a big garden, full of tall trees and soft green grass. Bramble loved the garden immediately. He ran here and there, sniffing the flowers, chasing the falling leaves, barking happily at the birds above him. But gardens are full of interesting smells, and sometimes, a little dog can get too excited. While the family sat inside, drinking tea and talking, Bramble found a small hole in the garden fence. He was curious. He pushed his nose through the hole, then his head. Then, before he could stop himself, his whole small body slipped through, and he was outside the garden, in the wide, unknown forest. At first, Bramble was excited. Everything smelled new and interesting. He chased a butterfly through the tall grass. He followed a rabbit under some bushes. He ran and ran, deeper and deeper into the trees, following one interesting smell after another. But slowly, the sky began to change. The bright afternoon light turned soft and golden, then gray, then finally, dark blue. Bramble stopped running. He looked around. Tall trees surrounded him on every side. He did not know which way was home. Bramble was a brave little dog, but now, alone in the dark forest, he felt very small and very afraid. He sat down on the cold ground and let out a long, sad howl. Meanwhile, back at the house, Milo noticed that Bramble was missing. "Bramble," he called, running through the garden. "Bramble, where are you?" His heart began to beat very fast. He found the small hole in the fence, and he understood immediately what had happened. "Mama? Papa," he shouted. "Bramble is gone! He went into the forest!" Milo's parents came running. His grandmother came too, holding a lantern, because the sky was already getting dark. "Do not worry," said Milo's grandmother, kneeling down beside him. "This forest is old, but it is not dangerous. We will find him. Dogs are clever. He will try to find his way back." They walked together into the forest, calling Bramble's name, their voices echoing between the tall, dark trees. Milo held tightly to his grandmother's hand, his eyes searching every shadow. Deep in the forest, Bramble heard something. A voice, far away, calling his name. He stood up quickly, his ears pointing forward, listening carefully. "Bramble!" It was Milo's voice. Bramble's tail began to wag. He ran toward the sound, but the forest was confusing in the darkness. Trees looked the same in every direction. He ran one way, then stopped, unsure, then ran another way. Then, Bramble remembered something. His mother, long ago, had taught him a trick when he was just a small puppy. Follow the smell of home, she had said. Though of course, dogs do not really talk. But somehow, deep inside, Bramble remembered the lesson anyway. He lowered his nose to the ground and began to sniff, carefully, patiently, searching for the path he had walked earlier that day. Slowly, very slowly, Bramble began to find small signs. A crushed leaf where his paw had stepped before, a broken twig, a patch of grass that still smelled faintly of his own scent. Step by step, he followed the invisible trail backward, the way he had come. Meanwhile, Milo, his parents, and his grandmother continued walking, their lantern casting a warm circle of light around them in the dark forest. "What if we don't find him?" Milo asked quietly, his voice shaking. His grandmother squeezed his hand gently. "We will find him, Milo. Have patience. Bramble loves you very much. He will find his way back to you, just as much as we are trying to find him." They walked further, calling his name again and again. The forest was quiet except for their voices and the soft sound of wind moving through the leaves above them. Then, suddenly, Milo heard something. A small sound, far away. A bark. "Did you hear that?" Milo said, stopping suddenly. They all stood still, listening carefully. Then, again, clearer this time, a small, happy bark. "Bramble!" Milo shouted, and ran toward the sound, his parents close behind him. And there, between two large trees, standing on shaky legs but with his tail wagging as fast as it could go, was Bramble. He was covered in leaves and dirt, and his fur was a little wet from the evening air, but he was safe. Milo dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around the little dog. Bramble licked his face again and again, whining happily, his whole body shaking with joy. "I was so scared," Milo whispered into Bramble's soft fur. "Don't ever run away again." Bramble, of course, did not understand every word, but he understood the feeling behind them. He pressed his small body close to Milo, as if to say, "I am sorry, and I am happy to be found." They walked back together through the dark forest, the lantern lighting their way, Bramble held safely in Milo's arms the whole time. When they reached the house, Milo's grandmother made warm milk for everyone, and Bramble had a special bowl of warm food and a soft blanket by the fire. That night, Milo did not let Bramble out of his sight. He held him close as they fell asleep together, the little dog's soft breathing calm and steady beside him. The next morning, before they left the village, Milo and his grandmother fixed the small hole in the garden fence together, using some wood and a few nails. "There," said his grandmother. "Now the garden is safe again." Milo smiled and looked down at Bramble, who was sitting patiently beside him, tail wagging gently. "No more adventures without me," Milo said softly, scratching Bramble behind the ears. Bramble gave a small happy bark, as if he completely agreed. And so, the little dog who once got lost in a great dark forest learned an important lesson that day, though he probably knew it all along, deep in his gentle heart, that home is not just a place, but the people and the love that are always waiting patiently for you to find your way back. If tonight you feel far from home, or far from someone you love, remember Bramble's journey through the dark forest. Remember that love always finds a way, slowly, patiently, step by step, back to where it belongs. Let that thought rest gently in your heart as you drift towards sleep. Let us stay a little longer with Milo and Bramble before we continue our journey tonight. 2 years passed after that frightening night in the forest. Milo was now 10 years old, and Bramble, though still small, had grown a little slower, a little grayer around his soft brown muzzle. They still walked to school together every morning, and they still slept together every night, though now, Bramble sometimes needed a gentle boost onto the bed, his once easy jump becoming a little more difficult with each passing year. One spring, Milo's family planned another visit to his grandmother's village. Milo felt excited, but also a little nervous, remembering the frightening night when Bramble had disappeared into the forest. "Do not worry," his grandmother told him warmly when they arrived. "We fixed that fence a long time ago, and Bramble is older and wiser now too." Milo smiled, but he still kept a close eye on his little dog throughout the visit, checking often to make sure Bramble stayed close beside him in the garden. On the second evening of their visit, something unexpected happened. Milo's grandmother mentioned, quite calmly over dinner, that a new family had moved into the old cottage on the far side of the forest, the very same forest where Bramble had once gotten lost. "They have children about your age, Milo," she said. "A boy and a girl. Perhaps you would like to visit them tomorrow." Milo agreed happily, and the next afternoon, he and Bramble walked together along the forest path, this time in bright daylight, following his grandmother's careful directions, toward the new family's cottage. As they walked, Milo noticed Bramble's ears perk up, his nose lifting slightly, sniffing the familiar forest air. Milo watched him carefully, remembering the frightening night 2 years before, but Bramble simply trotted along calmly beside him, occasionally sniffing at an interesting bush or fallen leaf, but never wandering far from Milo's side. "You remember this place too, don't you?" Milo said softly to his little dog. Bramble looked up at him, tail wagging gently, as if to say, "Of course I do, but I have learned my lesson well." They arrived at the new family's cottage to find 2 children playing in the front garden, a boy named Casimir, who was 11, and his younger sister Nadia, who was 7. Both children immediately fell in love with Bramble, and soon all 3 children were running happily through the garden together, Bramble barking joyfully at their heels. "He is such a good dog," said Nadia, kneeling down to scratch Bramble gently behind his ears. "Did you train him to be so calm and gentle?" Milo smiled, thinking about their whole journey together, including the frightening night in the forest. "He taught himself a few important lessons," Milo said thoughtfully, "and I think I learned some too." As the afternoon continued, Casimir mentioned that he and Nadia sometimes felt a little nervous about the forest themselves, since they were still new to the area and did not know its paths very well. "Would you like me to show you a good way to explore it safely?" Milo offered. "My grandmother taught me some useful things about how to always remember your path home." The children agreed eagerly, and the following days, while Milo's family remained in the village, he taught Casimir and Nadia the very same lessons his grandmother had once taught him: how to notice landmarks along a path, like a particularly large tree or an unusual rock, so you could always find your way back. How to listen carefully for familiar sounds, like a distant stream or a specific bird call. That could help guide you home even when visibility was poor. And most importantly, how to stay calm if you ever did become lost, rather than panicking and running further in the wrong direction. Bramble accompanied them on every walk, and Milo noticed with quiet pride how carefully his little dog now stayed close, occasionally checking behind him, as if making sure everyone in their small group remained safely together. On the final evening of their visit, as Milo's family prepared to return home, Casimir and Nadia's parents invited them all for a farewell dinner. Sitting together around a warm table, Milo's grandmother told the new family the story of the night Bramble had once gotten lost in the very same forest. "That must have been terrifying," said Casimir's mother, glancing warmly at Bramble, who lay curled comfortably beside Milo's chair. "It was," Milo admitted. "But I think, in a strange way, it also taught us both something important. Bramble learned to stay close and pay attention, and I learned that even when something scary happens, if you stay calm and think carefully, you can usually find your way back to safety." Casimir's father nodded thoughtfully. "That is a valuable lesson for anyone, at any age," he said. "Thank you for sharing it with our children so patiently this week." As Milo's family said their goodbyes and began the journey home the next morning, Nadia ran out to the car with a small hand-drawn picture, a simple drawing of Bramble sitting proudly beneath a large forest tree. "So you remember us," she said shyly, handing Milo the picture. Milo smiled warmly, tucking the picture carefully into his bag. "We will visit again soon," he promised, "and maybe next time you can show me your favorite forest path too." As they drove away, Milo looked down at Bramble, curled comfortably on the seat beside him, already drifting into a peaceful, contented sleep after their busy week of adventures. "You did good this time," Milo whispered softly, gently scratching behind Bramble's soft, floppy ears. "No getting lost. Just new friends and new adventures right by my side, exactly where you belong." Bramble sighed contentedly in his sleep, his small body curled warmly against Milo's leg, safe and home, exactly where he was always meant to be. One more gentle memory of Bramble deserves sharing before we continue. When Bramble finally grew very old, his brown fur turning soft gray around his muzzle, his once quick legs moving slowly and carefully, Milo, now a young man himself, still cared for his old friend with exactly the same devotion he had shown as a young boy. Every evening, Milo carried Bramble gently up onto the bed, since the old dog could no longer manage the small jump himself. Every morning, he carried him carefully back down again, walking slowly beside him through the garden, matching his own pace to Bramble's now gentle, unhurried steps. "You do not need to run anymore," Milo told him softly one quiet afternoon, as they sat together beneath a large tree in the garden. "We have already had so many wonderful adventures together. Now we can simply rest, quietly, side by side." Bramble looked up at him with warm, grateful eyes, resting his graying head gently against Milo's leg, content simply to be near the boy, now grown, who had loved him so faithfully throughout his entire life. When Bramble finally passed away peacefully one autumn evening, curled comfortably in his favorite spot beside the fire, Milo felt a deep, quiet sadness, but also a profound, gentle gratitude for every single moment they had shared together, from that frightening night in the forest to their many quiet, peaceful years afterward. He buried Bramble gently beneath the very same large tree in the garden where they had so often rested together, and he planted a small, simple flower above the spot, a quiet, living reminder of the loyal, gentle companion who had taught him, so many years before, that home is not simply a place, but the people and the animals we love faithfully and who love us faithfully in return. One more small, quiet memory of Bramble is worth sharing before we continue. Long after Bramble had gone, Milo's own children grew up hearing the story of the little dog who once got lost in the forest, and who taught their father such an important lesson about home and belonging. Milo told the story slowly, gently, always ending with the same soft words. "A loyal heart, once given fully, never truly leaves us. It simply waits quietly, warm and patient, inside our own memory, ready to comfort us whenever we need it most." His children, though they had never met Bramble themselves, felt, somehow, that they knew him well. His soft, floppy ears, his short, wagging tail, his brave, gentle heart. And on quiet evenings, when the family walked together through the very same garden, past the very same large tree, they often paused for a moment, remembering warmly the small, loyal dog whose simple, loving presence had left such a lasting, gentle mark on their entire family's story. One last small thought about Bramble deserves a quiet mention before we continue tonight. Milo's grandmother, many years later, still kept a small photograph on her wall, a blurry, laughing picture of a young boy and his small brown dog, taken on that very same afternoon they first met the new family beyond the forest. Visitors to her home often asked about it, and she always answered the same gentle way. "That is a story about a dog who got lost once, and a boy who never stopped looking for him," she would say, smiling warmly, "and about how, sometimes, the most frightening nights of our lives become, later, the stories we treasure most, because of everything gentle and good that grew quietly out of them afterward." Chapter 3. The Baker Who Woke Before the Sun. In a small town, on a quiet street with old stone houses, there was a small bakery called the Golden Loaf. Every single morning, long before the sun rose, long before the birds began to sing, a woman named Marta walked down the narrow street, unlocked the wooden door of her bakery, and began her work. Marta was 50 years old. She had worked in this bakery since she was a young girl, learning everything from her own mother, who had learned everything from her mother before that. The bakery had been in Marta's family for almost 100 years. Every morning Marta arrived at 4 o'clock, when the whole town was still sleeping, when the sky was still deep black, filled with quiet stars. She lit the big brick oven first, feeding it with small pieces of wood until a warm orange fire glowed steadily inside. Then, while the oven grew hot, she began to make the dough. Marta's hands knew the work without needing her eyes. Flour, water, salt, and a small amount of old dough saved from the day before, called a starter, which held tiny living things inside it, things too small to see, but powerful enough to make bread rise soft and light. She mixed everything together in a big wooden bowl, slowly, patiently, until the dough became smooth and soft under her fingers. The kitchen was quiet at this hour, only the sound of her hands working the dough and the soft crackle of the fire in the oven, and outside, sometimes, the distant call of an owl returning home before the dawn. Marta liked this quiet time very much. She said it was the most peaceful part of her whole day. "The world is resting," she often told her young apprentice, a boy named Dario, who had begun working with her a few months earlier. "And in that quiet, I can hear my own thoughts clearly, like clean water in a still pond." Dario was 16 years old, and at first, waking up so early had been very difficult for him. His eyes were heavy, his body wanted only to sleep, but slowly, over the weeks, he began to understand what Marta meant. One morning, as they worked together shaping small round loaves of bread, Dario asked her a question that had been on his mind for a long time. Marta, he said, why do you wake up so early? Could we not simply start later, when the sun is already up? The bread would still be ready by the time the shop opens. Marta smiled softly, not stopping her hands from their gentle, practiced movements. Let me tell you something, Dario, she said. Bread needs time, time to rise, time to rest, time to become what it is meant to become. If I rush the bread, if I do not give it enough time, it will be flat and hard and without life. The same dough, given patience and time, becomes soft and warm and full of life. She placed a small loaf gently onto a wooden tray. But there is another reason too, she continued. When I wake before the sun, I am the first person in this whole town to greet the new day. Before anyone else opens their eyes, I am already awake, watching the darkness slowly turn to gray, then to gold. It reminds me, every single morning, that no matter how dark the night was, the sun always returns, always. Dario thought about her words as he shaped another piece of dough between his hands. Also, Marta added with a small smile, there is something else. Come, I will show you. She walked to the window and opened it slightly. The cool night air came in, fresh and quiet. Outside, the street was empty and silent, lit only by one old street lamp, its light soft and yellow against the dark blue sky. Listen, Marta whispered. Dario listened. At first, he heard nothing at all. But slowly, he began to notice small sounds. The gentle whisper of wind moving between the buildings. The distant, soft sound of the sea, many streets away. A single bird, somewhere far off, beginning its first quiet song of the morning. This town is loud during the day, said Marta. Full of voices and cars and footsteps and laughter. But right now, in this hour, the town shows its true, quiet heart. This is when I feel closest to it. This is when I understand why I love this work so much. They continued working together as the sky slowly began to change outside the window. The deep black softened into dark blue, then into a gentle gray, and finally, the very first thin line of gold appeared at the edge of the horizon. By the time the sun was fully risen, warm and bright over the rooftops of the town, the bakery was already filled with the rich, comforting smell of fresh bread. Golden loaves, round and warm, sat cooling on wooden shelves. Small sweet pastries, dusted with sugar, waited in neat rows in the front window. At 7 o'clock, Marta unlocked the front door of the shop, and the first customers began to arrive. An old man who came every single morning for the same small loaf of dark bread. A young mother with a sleepy child, buying sweet rolls for breakfast. A group of workers, stopping quickly on their way to the fields, buying bread to take with them for their long day of work. Each customer smiled when they walked through the door, greeted by the warm smell of fresh bread and Marta's gentle, welcoming face. Good morning, Marta, they said, one after another. Good morning, she replied warmly, wrapping their bread carefully in soft paper. Dario watched all of this from behind the counter, and slowly, he began to understand something important. The bread they made in the quiet, dark hours before dawn was not just food. It was something that connected the whole town together, every single morning, in a simple, warm way. As the weeks passed, Dario found that he no longer minded waking so early. In fact, he began to look forward to it. He began to love the quiet kitchen, the soft glow of the oven fire, the gentle rhythm of working dough between his hands, while the rest of the world slept peacefully outside. One morning, many months later, Marta arrived at the bakery to find that Dario had already arrived before her, the oven already warming, the first batch of dough already resting under a soft cloth. You beat me here today, Marta said, smiling with surprise. Dario smiled back at her. I wanted to greet the day first, just once, he said. I wanted to hear the town's quiet heart, like you showed me. Marta's eyes grew warm with pride. Then you understand now, she said softly. You understand why we wake before the sun. Years later, when Marta grew too old to wake so early anymore, it was Dario who unlocked the bakery door every morning at 4 o'clock, lighting the fire in the old brick oven, mixing the dough with patient, careful hands, listening to the quiet town breathing softly in its sleep. And every morning, as the first thin line of gold appeared over the rooftops, Dario remembered Marta's words, and felt grateful for the quiet, gentle hours before dawn, when the whole world rested, and the bread slowly, patiently, became what it was always meant to become. If you are tired tonight, think of the quiet bakery, warm and golden, waiting patiently through the dark hours for the sun to rise. Think of dough resting gently under a soft cloth, taking its time, becoming something warm and good. Let your own body rest now, just like that dough, patient and slow, until morning comes softly, and you wake, renewed, just like the golden sun over a quiet little town. Let us stay a little longer in the warm kitchen of the Golden Loaf, before we move to the next story. Several years after Dario first arrived before dawn to greet the quiet morning himself, the small bakery faced an unexpected challenge. A large new bakery opened on the busy main road at the edge of town, with bright lights, modern machines, and prices lower than Marta could ever offer from her small traditional shop. Some of the townspeople, tempted by the lower prices and the shiny new building, began buying their bread from the new bakery instead. Slowly, over several months, fewer customers walked through the Golden Loaf's familiar wooden door each morning. Dario, now a grown man running much of the daily work himself, grew worried. One evening, after closing the shop early because so little bread had sold that day, he sat with Marta, now quite elderly, in the quiet kitchen. "Marta," he said, his voice heavy with concern, "I do not know what to do. Their bread is cheaper, their shop is bigger, brighter. I fear we cannot compete." Marta, sitting calmly in her favorite chair near the warm oven, listened patiently before responding. "Tell me," she said, "have you tasted their bread?" Dario nodded. "I have. It rises quickly, using strong chemicals instead of patient time. It is soft, yes, but it does not taste the same. It does not have—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Life," Marta finished gently. "It does not have the same life inside it, because it was not given the same patient time to develop it. But most people do not seem to notice the difference," Dario said, worry still clear in his voice. "They only notice the lower price." Marta smiled softly, her eyes still bright despite her age. "Some people will always choose the cheaper option, and that is simply the way of things. We cannot control that. But others, given time, will begin to notice the difference. They will remember why our bread tastes different, why it feels different in their hands, why sharing it with their families feels like something more than simply eating food." "How can we help them remember?" Dario asked. Marta thought for a long moment. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "it is time to teach others what we know, rather than simply making bread quietly behind closed doors." The following week, Marta and Dario tried something new. They opened their kitchen doors early one Saturday morning, inviting curious townspeople to watch, and even help with the traditional bread-making process. Children mixed flour and water under Marta's gentle guidance. Parents watched as Dario carefully shaped dough into traditional loaves, explaining patiently why the slow-rising process created such a different, richer flavor. At first, only a few curious neighbors came. But slowly, over several weeks, word spread throughout the town about the warm, welcoming mornings at the Golden Loaf, where children could get their hands doughy and flour-covered, where the rich smell of fresh bread filled the whole street, where an old woman with kind eyes patiently explained old traditions passed down through generations of her family. Families began returning, not only for the bread itself, but for the warm, community feeling that surrounded it. Even some families who had switched to the new bakery down the road found themselves returning to the Golden Loaf, remembering now exactly why they had loved it in the first place. One morning, months later, as Dario shaped fresh loaves alongside several children eagerly learning beside him, Marta watched quietly from her chair, a warm, contented smile on her face. "You did it," she said softly to Dario, as the morning sun began rising golden over the rooftops outside. "You found a way to share our quiet mornings with the whole town, rather than keeping them only for ourselves." Dario smiled back at her, flour dusting his hands and apron. "I simply remembered what you always taught me," he said. "Good things, given patient time and genuine care, eventually find their way to the people who truly need them." The new bakery down the road continued its business too, offering its own kind of convenience for busy mornings. But the Golden Loaf found its own steady, faithful place once again in the heart of the town, not through competing on price, but through sharing patiently, generously, the quiet warmth and tradition that had always made it truly special. Years later, when Marta finally passed away peacefully, surrounded by her loving family, the whole town gathered for her memorial, each person carrying warm memories of golden bread, quiet mornings, and a gentle woman who had taught an entire community that some things, truly good things, are always worth the patient, unhurried time they require. There is one final quiet memory from the golden loaf worth sharing before we move onward tonight. Long after Marta had passed peacefully, and Dario himself had grown old running the small bakery, a young girl named Sarah began working alongside him, much as he once worked alongside Marta many decades before. Sarah was curious, eager, and often impatient, wanting to understand every technique quickly, all at once. One early morning, as they worked together shaping the day's first loaves in the quiet, pre-dawn kitchen, Sarah grew frustrated with a particularly difficult braided loaf she was attempting to shape. "I cannot make it look right," she said, her voice tight with frustration, staring at her uneven, lopsided attempt. "Yours always look perfect, effortless. Why can I not do the same?" Dario smiled gently, remembering his own early frustrations decades before, and Marta's endlessly patient guidance through each one. "Let me tell you something Marta once taught me," he said softly, setting down his own work for a moment. "When I was your age, just beginning here, my loaves looked far worse than yours does right now. I grew frustrated too, wanting perfection immediately, without patience." "What'd she tell you?" Sarah asked, her frustration softening slightly with curiosity. "She told me that patience is not simply waiting quietly," Dario said. "Patience is also allowing yourself room to be imperfect, again and again, for as long as it takes, without judging yourself too harshly along the way. Just as dough needs patient time to rise properly, our own skills need patient time, and many imperfect attempts, before they too can rise into something we can finally be proud of." Sarah looked down at her uneven loaf, considering his words carefully. "Every single loaf I make today, even the imperfect ones, is simply one more small step toward eventually shaping a perfect one," she said slowly, understanding gradually dawning in her voice. "Exactly," Dario said warmly. "And truthfully, even now, after all these years, I still occasionally shape a lopsided loaf myself. Perfection was never truly the goal. Patient, consistent care was always the real goal, all along." Encouraged by his gentle words, Sarah continued practicing patiently over the following weeks and months, and slowly, gradually, her braided loaves began looking more even, more confident, more her own. She never achieved flawless perfection, exactly as Dario had gently warned her, but she achieved something perhaps even more valuable, a steady, patient confidence in her own slowly developing skill. Years later, when Sarah herself began training a new, eager young apprentice, she found herself repeating, almost word for word, the very same patient wisdom Dario had once shared with her, which he himself had once received from Marta. A gentle chain of patient wisdom passed faithfully forward, one generation of bakers to the next. Exactly like the quiet, faithful starter dough itself, carried forward carefully, one small piece at a time, connecting each new loaf to all the countless loaves that had come faithfully before it. One further quiet memory from the golden loaf deserves mention before we continue our journey tonight. Long after Dario himself had grown old and passed the bakery onward to Sarah, visitors to the small town often remarked on something curious. No matter how many other bakeries opened nearby, promising faster service or lower prices, the golden loaf always remained full each morning, its small tables crowded with familiar faces, its warm smell drawing people from streets away. An elderly woman once explained it simply to a visiting journalist who had come to write about the town's unusual, enduring little bakery. "It is not really about the bread," she said, smiling warmly. "Though the bread, of course, is wonderful. It is about walking through that door each morning and feeling, for just a few quiet minutes, that you belong somewhere warm, somewhere patient, somewhere that has cared enough to do things slowly and properly for nearly 200 years now." The journalist wrote down her words carefully, though privately, she suspected no article could ever fully capture the quiet, golden warmth that filled that small kitchen each morning, long before the sun itself had even fully risen over the sleepy rooftops of the little town. There is one more full memory from the golden loaf worth sharing before we continue our journey tonight. From a difficult year that tested the bakery in an entirely different way than the arrival of the new competitor down the road. It happened during Dario's later years, when he had already trained Sarah and was slowly beginning to hand over more and more of the daily work to her steady, capable hands. That winter, an unusually harsh cold settled over the whole region, and one bitter January morning, Dario arrived at the bakery before dawn, exactly as he had for decades, only to find the old brick oven completely cold. Its fire refused to catch no matter how carefully he tried. He called for a repairman as soon as the sun rose, but was told, with an apologetic shrug, that the old oven's internal stones had finally cracked from decades of heat and cold, and repairing it properly would take at least 2 full weeks, since the special clay bricks needed to be ordered from a distant city. 2 weeks without our oven, Sarah said, staring at the cold, dark hearth with growing worry. How will we manage? Half the town depends on their morning bread from us. Dario stood quietly for a long moment, staring at the oven that had baked bread for nearly 200 years, through wars, through difficult harvests, through every kind of hardship this small town had ever faced. He thought of Marta, and of her mother before her, and all the mornings this same oven had warmed with its steady, patient fire. "We will not close," he said finally, a quiet determination settling into his voice. "We will simply find another way, for these 2 weeks." That very afternoon, Dario walked from house to house throughout the small town, visiting neighbors he had known his entire life, asking a simple, humble question. Would they be willing to lend their own home ovens, just for a few hours each morning, so the golden loaf could continue baking, even without its beloved brick oven? To his quiet delight, neighbor after neighbor agreed warmly, remembering countless mornings of fresh bread, remembering Marta's kindness, remembering the community feeling Dario himself had worked so hard to build during the difficult years of competition years before. And so, for 2 remarkable weeks, Dario and Sarah rose even earlier than usual, sometimes at 2 or 3 in the morning, carrying carefully prepared dough in large covered baskets from house to house throughout the sleeping town, baking small batches in borrowed kitchen ovens, then hurrying back to the shop before sunrise to arrange the bread, still warm, in the familiar front window. It was exhausting, difficult work, far harder than their usual routine, but something remarkable happened during those 2 strange weeks. The whole town, in its own quiet way, became part of the baking process itself. Children woke early to watch Dario carry dough past their windows in the pale, pre-dawn light. Elderly neighbors, unable to sleep anyway, sat with Sarah in their warm kitchens while bread baked slowly in their own ovens, sharing quiet conversation and old stories about the town's long history. When the repaired oven finally arrived, its new clay bricks carefully installed by the exhausted but relieved repairman, the whole town gathered for a small, informal celebration outside the bakery. Dario lit the first fire in the newly repaired oven himself, and as its warm orange glow filled the old brick hearth once again, cheers and warm applause rose from the gathered crowd. "You know," an elderly neighbor told Dario that evening, watching the familiar golden light spill once more from the bakery's windows, "I think those 2 strange weeks, difficult as they were, actually brought our whole town closer together than it has been in many years." Sometimes, the most difficult chapters end up teaching us the most valuable lessons of all. Dario nodded thoughtfully, remembering Marta's own words from so many years before, about patience, about time, about how difficulties, given patient care and community support, could transform slowly into something unexpectedly beautiful. Years later, this story became one of the most beloved tales told throughout the small town, passed down affectionately alongside all the other quiet legends of the Golden Loaf. The story of the winter the whole town became, briefly and wonderfully, one enormous shared bakery. All because one patient baker refused to let a broken oven break his community's simple, warm tradition of fresh bread each morning. Chapter 4. The Boy Who Talked to the Moon. In a small house at the edge of a quiet valley, there lived a boy named Tobias. Tobias was 9 years old, and he had a habit that made his parents smile every night. Before he went to sleep, he always opened his window just a little, looked up at the sky, and talked quietly to the moon. "Good evening, moon," he would whisper. "How was your day today?" Of course, the moon never answered him with words, but Tobias believed, in the deep, honest way that only children can believe, that the moon was listening carefully to everything he said. Tobias began this habit when he was very small, after his grandfather told him an old story. His grandfather said that long, long ago, the moon was lonely, because it traveled alone across the dark sky every single night, with no one to talk to, no one to share its thoughts with. "So," his grandfather said, "if you ever feel lonely at night, talk to the moon. It will be glad for the company, and perhaps it will feel a little less alone too." Tobias never forgot this story, and so, every night, rain or clear sky, he opened his window and spoke softly into the darkness. He told the moon about his school day. He told the moon about his friends, and sometimes, about small arguments with his little sister. He told the moon his worries, small ones, like a test he was nervous about, and big ones too, like when his grandfather became sick. One night, during a difficult time, when his grandfather was very unwell in the hospital, Tobias sat by his open window, feeling more afraid than he had ever felt before. "Moon," he whispered, his voice shaking slightly, "my grandfather is very sick. The doctors say they are doing everything they can. But I am scared. I do not want him to go away." The moon, as always, said nothing. But it shone quietly through the window, its soft silver light falling gently across Tobias's small bed, across his hands folded together, across his worried face. Tobias took a slow breath. Somehow, just saying his fear out loud, into the calm, quiet night, made the heavy feeling in his chest feel a little lighter, not gone completely, but lighter, like a stone that had been carried in water for a long time, slowly becoming smooth and easier to hold. "Thank you for listening," he whispered, before finally closing his eyes and falling into a tired, uneasy sleep. The next morning, his mother told him that his grandfather's fever had finally broken during the night, and the doctor said he was beginning, slowly, to get better. Tobias felt a great wave of relief wash over him. That night, when he opened his window again, he smiled up at the moon. "Thank you," he said softly. "I think you helped, somehow." As the weeks passed, his grandfather grew stronger, and eventually, he came home from the hospital. On his first evening back, he sat with Tobias by the window, and Tobias told him about his nightly conversations with the moon. His grandfather smiled, his eyes soft with warmth. "You know," he said, "when I was a boy, I did the very same thing. My own grandmother taught me that story about the lonely moon. Perhaps it is very old, this story. Perhaps it has been passed from grandparent to grandchild for 100 years, or even longer." "Do you think the moon really listens?" Tobias asked. His grandfather thought for a moment before answering. "I think," he said slowly, "that the moon teaches us something important, whether it truly listens or not. It teaches us that speaking our fears out loud, into the quiet dark, can make them smaller. It teaches us that even when we feel completely alone, something is still there above us, patient and calm, keeping us gentle company through the night." Tobias nodded, thinking about his grandfather's words carefully. From that night onward, sometimes his grandfather joined him by the window, and together, the old man and the young boy spoke softly to the moon, sharing their thoughts, their small worries, and their quiet gratitude for another day together. Years passed slowly, as years always do. Tobias grew older, taller, and eventually, he became a young man. But even then, even after he moved away from his childhood home to study in a large city far away, he never fully stopped his old habit. On difficult nights, in his small apartment far from home, he would still open his window, look up at the same moon that had followed him his whole life, and speak quietly into the dark. "Good evening, moon," he would say, just as he had said as a small boy. "It has been a long day." And somehow, even as an adult, in a city full of noise and busy streets, that small quiet habit still brought him the same gentle comfort it always had. Because the moon, he realized, was the one thing that connected every place he had ever lived. The same moon that watched over his childhood window in the quiet valley was the same moon that watched over his new window in the busy city. The same moon that his grandfather once spoke to as a young boy, generations ago, was the very same moon watching over Tobias now. In this way, Tobias understood, we are never truly as alone as we sometimes feel. Above every window, in every town, in every country in the entire world, the very same moon rises quietly each night, patient and gentle, ready to listen to anyone who looks up and speaks softly into the dark. Many years later, Tobias had children of his own, and on quiet evenings, he told them the very same old story his grandfather once told him, about a moon that traveled alone across the sky, and how speaking to it, softly, honestly, could make heavy hearts feel just a little lighter. His children listened with wide, curious eyes, and that very night, before bed, his youngest daughter walked quietly to her window, opened it just a little, and whispered up into the darkness. "Good evening, moon," she said softly. "This is my very first time talking to you." And somewhere above the quiet house, the moon continued its slow, patient journey across the sky, exactly as it always had, and exactly as it always would, carrying with it, gently, every small whispered word, every quiet worry, every soft good night, from every window, in every corner of the world, forever patient, forever listening, forever there. Tonight, if you wish, you may look outside your own window too. Perhaps the moon is there, round and silver, or perhaps only hidden behind soft clouds. Either way, know that it is there, exactly where it has always been, patient and calm above you. If you have any small worry resting in your heart tonight, you may whisper it quietly into the dark, just like Tobias did. Let it go gently, and let your heart grow just a little lighter, as you slowly drift toward a calm and peaceful sleep. Let us stay a little longer with Tobias, before we continue our journey tonight. When Tobias became a father himself, many years after his grandfather first told him the old story of the lonely moon, he faced a difficult night unlike any he had faced before. His own young son, Mateus, only 6 years old, had grown terribly afraid of the dark after a particularly frightening thunderstorm shook their house one evening. For several weeks after the storm, Mateus refused to sleep with his window open even slightly, refused to look outside at night, and often woke crying in the middle of the night, convinced that something frightening waited for him in the darkness beyond his room. Tobias remembered clearly his own grandfather's gentle wisdom, and one calm, clear evening he sat beside his son's bed, speaking softly. "Mateus," he said gently, "would you like to hear a very old story? One that was told to me by my own grandfather when I was about your age?" Mateus, curled tightly beneath his blankets, nodded cautiously. Tobias told him the old story, exactly as he remembered it, about a moon that traveled alone across the dark sky every single night, with no one to talk to, no one to share its thoughts with, and how speaking softly to it, sharing your own worries and fears, could make both the moon and yourself feel a little less alone. "Do you think the moon is still lonely?" Mateus asked quietly, his fear momentarily replaced by curiosity. "Perhaps a little," said Tobias. "Would you like to say hello to it, just once, together with me?" Mateus hesitated, glancing nervously toward the window, still tightly closed. Slowly, encouraged by his father's calm, steady presence beside him, he nodded. Together, they walked to the window. Tobias opened it just a little, letting in the cool night air. Mateus pressed close against his father's side, but he looked up, cautiously, at the sky. There, among soft, scattered clouds, hung a bright, round moon, calm and silver against the dark blue night. "Good evening, moon," Tobias whispered softly, exactly as he had whispered thousands of times throughout his own childhood. "This is my son, Mateus. He has been feeling a little afraid of the dark lately." Mateus watched his father speak so calmly, so gently, to the quiet sky, and slowly, his own small fear began to soften. "Good evening, moon," he whispered shyly, copying his father's soft words. "I am sorry I have been afraid of you lately. I do not think it was really your fault." Tobias smiled warmly, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. They stood together a while longer, simply watching the moon, saying nothing more, letting the calm night air settle gently around them. From that evening onward, Mateus slowly began opening his own window again each night, sometimes whispering quietly to the moon by himself, sometimes inviting his father to join him. Gradually, over several weeks, his fear of the dark softened into something calmer, more manageable, until eventually, it disappeared almost entirely. One night, several months later, Tobias found his son already standing quietly by his open window when he came to check on him before his own bedtime. "What are you telling the moon tonight?" Tobias asked softly, standing quietly in the doorway. Mateus turned, smiling warmly. "I was telling it that I am not afraid anymore," he said, "and that I think, someday, when I have children of my own, I will teach them to talk to it too." Tobias felt his heart swell warmly with quiet pride. He walked over and sat beside his son on the windowsill, and together, father and son looked up once more at the same patient, silver moon that had comforted so many generations before them, and would continue, faithfully, to comfort so many more generations still to come. One final gentle memory about the moon deserves sharing before we continue our journey tonight. Many years later, when Tobias himself had grown very old, and Mateus had children of his own, Tobias found himself, on a particularly difficult night, unable to sleep, his old heart heavy with quiet worries about his own health, which had begun growing frail with age. Unable to rest, he rose slowly from his bed and walked, carefully and slowly, toward his bedroom window, exactly as he had done countless times throughout his entire long life. He opened it gently, feeling the cool night air against his aged skin, and looked up, once more, at the same patient, silver moon that had comforted him since he was a small boy. "Good evening, moon," he whispered softly, his voice thin and quiet with age. "It has been a very long life. I am tired now, and a little afraid of what comes next." The moon, as always, offered no words in return, only its same steady, patient, silver light, falling gently across his wrinkled hands, exactly as it had fallen across his small boyish hands, so very many years before. As he stood quietly at his window, his grandson Mateus, hearing soft movement in the house, came quietly to check on him. "Grandfather," Mateus whispered gently, standing beside him. "Are you all right?" Tobias smiled softly, his old eyes still fixed on the patient moon above them. "I am simply talking with an old friend," he said. "One I have known my entire life." Mateus, remembering clearly his own childhood fear of darkness, and the gentle lesson his father had once taught him at this very same window, understood immediately. "May I join you?" he asked softly. Tobias nodded warmly, and together, grandfather and grandson stood quietly at the window, looking up at the same patient moon that had comforted so many generations of their family before them. "I am not as afraid now," Tobias finally whispered, his voice calm and peaceful. "Speaking my fear aloud, exactly as I always have, makes it feel smaller somehow, more manageable, just as it always has, since I was a small boy your father's age." Mateus squeezed his grandfather's hand gently, feeling the quiet, patient comfort of that same ancient moon settling softly over both of them, connecting generations past, present, and generations still yet to come, all beneath its same steady silver light. One further gentle memory about the moon deserves a quiet mention before we continue our journey tonight. Long after Tobias had passed peacefully, surrounded by his loving family, Mateus continued the same gentle tradition with his own grandchildren, exactly as his father had once continued it with him. On quiet evenings, whenever a small worried face appeared at his door, unable to sleep, Mateus simply smiled, took the child's hand gently, and walked with them slowly toward the nearest open window. "Let us say hello to an old friend of our family," he would say softly, and together, they would look up at the same patient moon that had comforted 4 generations now, whispering their small worries quietly into the calm night air, watching them soften and settle, exactly as they always had, beneath that same silver, steady light. And so, quietly, gently, across many generations, in many different homes, the very same simple habit continued faithfully onward, a family's small, patient tradition of speaking honestly to the moon, finding comfort not in magic, but simply in the quiet, ancient practice of naming their fears aloud, and watching them grow smaller beneath a calm and steady sky. There is one more full memory about the moon worth sharing before we continue our journey tonight. From a particularly difficult year in Tobias's adult life that tested his old childhood habit in an entirely new way. It happened when Tobias was in his 30s, working as an engineer in a large city far from his childhood valley. A difficult project at his company had gone badly wrong, through no real fault of his own, and he found himself unfairly blamed by his supervisors, his reputation suddenly, unexpectedly, under serious threat. For several weeks, Tobias could barely sleep, his mind racing endlessly through worried thoughts about his career, his future, and how unfairly the whole situation had unfolded. Even his old habit of speaking to the moon each night began to feel hollow, insufficient against such a large, complicated adult problem. One particularly difficult evening, after another exhausting, anxious day at work, Tobias stood at his apartment window, staring up at the moon with unusual frustration. "I do not know if this still works," he admitted quietly, almost angrily, to the patient sky above him. "This helped me with childhood fears, simple fears. But this problem is complicated. Adults do not solve real problems by talking to the moon." He almost closed the window right then, ready to abandon the childhood habit entirely as foolish, immature nonsense unsuited to his serious adult troubles. But some quiet memory of his grandfather's gentle voice, made him pause. Instead of closing the window, he sat down slowly on the floor beside it, and for the first time in many years, he spoke honestly, at length, about everything troubling him: the unfairness of his situation, his fear of losing his job, his worry about disappointing his own young family. He spoke for nearly 20 minutes, longer than he had ever spoken to the moon before, and slowly, gradually, as he spoke, something shifted quietly within him. Not the problem itself, which remained just as complicated and unfair as before, but something in how heavily he carried it, By the time he finished speaking and finally closed the window against the cool night air, he felt, for the first time in weeks, calm enough to actually think clearly about his situation, rather than simply feeling overwhelmed and panicked by it. The next morning, with a clearer, calmer mind, Tobias approached his supervisor directly, calmly explaining his side of the difficult situation, presenting careful evidence he had been too anxious and overwhelmed to organize properly before. To his relief, his supervisor listened carefully, and within a few days, the unfair blame was properly redirected, and Tobias's reputation was fully restored. That evening, standing once more at his window, Tobias smiled softly up at the familiar moon. "I understand now," he whispered. "You were never meant to solve my problems directly. You were simply meant to give me a quiet place to release them honestly, so my own mind could finally think clearly enough to solve them myself." From that experience onward, Tobias never again doubted his old childhood habit, understanding now, as a grown man facing real adult difficulties, exactly why his grandfather had first taught it to him, so many years before beneath that very same patient, silver sky. Chapter 5. The Old Train at Midnight. In a small station, far from any big city, there was an old train that arrived only once, every single night, exactly at midnight. The station was small and quiet, with only one platform, one wooden bench, and one old lamp that glowed a soft, warm yellow in the darkness. The station master was a gentle old man named Joseph. He had worked at this small station for 40 years, and every night, without fail, he waited on the platform for the midnight train. Most nights, no passengers came. The train arrived, stood quietly for exactly 3 minutes, and then continued on its long journey through the dark countryside. Joseph simply watched it come, and watched it go, alone in the quiet night. But sometimes, someone did come. A tired traveler, walking slowly down the dark road toward the small station, carrying a heavy bag, looking for a quiet place to rest before continuing their journey the next day. One cold autumn night, a young woman named Anna arrived at the station. She looked tired and worried, her eyes red from crying. She sat down on the wooden bench and stared at the train tracks, saying nothing. Joseph, who had seen many tired travelers over the years, walked over slowly and sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Cold night," he said gently, not looking directly at her, giving her space to speak if she wished, or to stay quiet if she preferred. Anna wiped her eyes and nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "Very cold." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind moving through the trees around the small station. "I am running away," Anna finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "From my old life, my old job. Everything felt too heavy. I do not know where this train goes, exactly, but I do not think it matters anymore. I just needed to leave." Joseph nodded slowly, understanding written clearly on his weathered face. "This train has carried many people like you," he said. "People running from something, people running towards something. Sometimes they are the same thing." Anna looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "I mean," said Joseph, "that sometimes running away from a heavy life and running toward a lighter one are really just two ways of describing the very same journey." Anna thought about his words quietly. In the distance, a soft whistle sounded, faint but growing steadily louder. The midnight train was approaching. "Will you take it?" Joseph asked gently. Anna looked at the tracks, then back at Joseph, then finally up at the dark sky full of quiet stars. "I think," she said slowly, "I need to sit here a little longer first. I think I need to just breathe before I decide anything." Joseph smiled kindly. "That is perfectly fine," he said. "The train comes again tomorrow night, and the night after that, and every single night after that too. It is patient. It will wait for you whenever you are ready." The train arrived, stood quietly for its usual 3 minutes, its windows glowing warm and golden in the dark night, and then continued on its journey, disappearing slowly into the darkness beyond the station. Anna stayed sitting on the bench a while longer, and Joseph sat quietly beside her, offering simply his calm, patient company. "Thank you," she finally said, "for not pushing me to decide anything tonight." "Some decisions," said Joseph, "need quiet time to become clear, like water becoming clear once the mud settles gently to the bottom. Rushing only stirs it up again." Anna returned to the small station many nights after that, sometimes talking with Joseph, sometimes simply sitting quietly, watching the midnight train arrive and depart. Slowly, over many weeks, her tired eyes began to look calmer. Her tight shoulders began to relax. One night, several months later, Anna arrived at the station carrying a small bag, and this time, when the midnight train arrived, she stood up slowly from the wooden bench. "I think I am ready now," she said to Joseph. "Where will you go?" he asked gently. Anna smiled, a real, warm smile that Joseph had not seen from her before. "I do not know exactly," she said, "but for the first time in a very long while, I am not afraid of not knowing." Joseph nodded warmly. "That," he said, "is exactly how every good journey should begin." Anna boarded the train, and as it slowly pulled away from the small station, she turned and waved to Joseph through the window. He waved back, standing alone once again on the quiet platform, the warm yellow lamp glowing softly beside him. Joseph continued his quiet work at the small station for many more years after that, greeting tired travelers, offering patient company, and watching, every single midnight, as the old train arrived faithfully, carrying people slowly, gently, toward wherever they needed to go next. If tonight you feel unsure about which direction your own life should take, remember Joseph and his small, quiet station. Remember that decisions do not need to be rushed. Like Anna, you may simply need to sit quietly for a while first, breathing slowly, letting your thoughts settle gently, until the right path becomes clear on its own, patient and unhurried, just like a train that always comes again tomorrow night. Let us stay a little longer at the small, quiet station before we continue our journey tonight. Many years after Anna boarded the midnight train and disappeared into her new, unknown life, Joseph continued his patient work at the small station, greeting new tired travelers as they came, always offering the same calm, quiet company he had offered Anna so many years before. One autumn evening, an old man arrived at the station, moving slowly, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. He sat down carefully on the familiar wooden bench, breathing heavily from his slow walk down the dark road. Joseph, now quite elderly himself, though still faithfully tending his small station every night, walked over slowly and sat down beside the tired traveler. "Long journey?" Joseph asked gently. The old man nodded, catching his breath. "Longer than you might think," he said, his voice raspy but warm. "I am returning to visit a place I left many years ago, out of fear, out of confusion. I have waited a long time to find the courage to come back." Joseph nodded understandingly, recognizing something familiar in the old man's tired, hopeful eyes. "This station has seen many travelers like you," Joseph said softly. "People running from difficult pasts, people searching, uncertain, for new futures. Sometimes, the very same person becomes both, many years apart." The old man studied Joseph's weathered, kind face carefully. "You know," he said slowly, "many years ago, when I was still young, I sat on this very same bench, running away from my old life. An old station master spoke with me that night, told me the train would wait patiently for me, whenever I was truly ready." Joseph's eyes widened slightly with quiet recognition. "Anna?" he asked softly. The old man laughed warmly, though his laugh quickly turned into a gentle cough. "Not Anna," he said. "But I remember her well. We shared this very bench one night, many years ago, both of us uncertain, both of us searching. My name is Marcus." Joseph smiled warmly, memories of countless quiet nights flooding gently back to him. "I remember you now," he said. "You sat quietly, barely speaking, for almost an hour, before finally boarding that midnight train." "I have thought of this station often, over all these years," Marcus said. "Whenever life grew difficult, whenever decisions felt too heavy, I remembered your patient words, and Anna's quiet courage, and somehow, it helped me find my own way forward, one small step at a time." They sat together quietly for a while, listening to the wind moving gently through nearby trees, watching the dark sky slowly filling with soft, scattered stars. "And now?" Joseph asked gently. "What brings you back tonight?" Marcus looked toward the train tracks, his eyes distant with memory. "My daughter lives in the town just beyond this station now," he said. "We have not spoken in many years, after a difficult disagreement drove us apart. I am finally ready, I think, to try mending what was broken." Joseph nodded slowly, understanding deeply the weight and courage behind such a journey. "The train will arrive soon," Joseph said gently. "But perhaps, this time, you do not need it. Perhaps this time, your journey continues simply by walking forward, on your own 2 feet, toward the town just beyond." Marcus smiled warmly, understanding immediately the deeper truth in Yosef's gentle words. "You are right," he said softly. "This time, I think I am ready to walk the rest of the way myself." He stood slowly, leaning on his cane, and turned to face Yosef one final time. "Thank you," he said, "for being exactly the same patient, quiet presence you were all those years ago." Some things, it seems, remain steady and true, even while everything else around us changes. Yosef watched warmly as Marcus walked slowly away from the station, down the quiet road leading toward the nearby town, his steps slow but determined, carrying him steadily toward reconciliation with his daughter after so many years apart. The midnight train arrived shortly after, exactly as it always did, standing quietly for its usual 3 minutes before continuing onward into the dark night. Yosef watched it go, alone once again on the quiet platform, the warm yellow lamp glowing gently beside him, patient as always, ready to welcome whoever might need his quiet company next. One final quiet memory from the small midnight station deserves sharing before we continue. When Yosef finally grew too old to continue his nightly work at the station, the local rail authority sent a young replacement station master named Lucia to take over his patient duties. Joseph spent his final week training her carefully, showing her every detail of the small station, though the most important lessons he knew could not simply be explained, only demonstrated, patiently, through quiet example. On his very last night, an anxious young man arrived at the station, pacing nervously along the platform, clearly troubled by something weighing heavily on his mind. "Watch closely," Joseph whispered gently to Lucia, as they observed from a respectful distance. Lucia watched as Joseph approached the young man slowly, sitting down beside him on the familiar wooden bench, offering simply his calm, patient presence, without immediately asking questions or offering unwanted advice. Slowly, the young man began speaking, sharing quietly his own worries about an important decision facing him. Joseph listened patiently, occasionally offering a few gentle words, but mostly, simply providing calm, steady company. After the young man boarded the midnight train, feeling visibly calmer than when he had arrived, Lucia turned to Joseph with quiet admiration. "How do you know exactly what to say?" she asked. Joseph smiled warmly, his weathered face gentle in the soft glow of the station's yellow lamp. "The secret," he said, "is that it is rarely about knowing exactly what to say. It is simply about being patiently, quietly present, and trusting that most people, given calm space and gentle company, will find their own way toward clarity, all on their own." Lucia nodded thoughtfully, understanding slowly settling within her, much as it once had within Joseph himself, decades before, when he first began this quiet, patient work. On his final morning, as Joseph prepared to leave the small station for the very last time, he handed Lucia the old brass key to the station's small office. "This station does not truly belong to any single station master," he told her gently. "It belongs to every tired, uncertain traveler who ever needed a quiet, patient place to rest, before continuing bravely onward into their own unknown future." Lucia accepted the key solemnly, understanding deeply the quiet, important tradition she now carried forward, faithfully continuing Joseph's gentle legacy of patient, quiet presence, one midnight traveler at a time. One further quiet memory from the small midnight station deserves mention before we continue our journey tonight. Years after Lucia took over the small station, she began keeping a simple notebook, tucked quietly beneath the wooden bench, where travelers who wished could leave a short note about their own midnight journey, if they felt moved to do so. Over time, the notebook filled slowly with quiet handwriting, brief words of gratitude, small confessions of fear finally released, gentle notes of hope for whatever waited at the journey's end. One entry, written in careful, old-fashioned handwriting, simply read, "I sat here once, many years ago, uncertain and afraid. Tonight, I return only to say thank you to whoever still tends this quiet place. The train came again, exactly as promised, and I was, finally, ready." Lucia read entries like this often, late at night, while waiting for the midnight train to arrive, and each time, she felt a quiet, warm reassurance that the patient work she had inherited, first from Joseph, and long before him, from station masters whose names had already faded gently into memory, continued faithfully to matter, one small, midnight journey at a time. There is one more full memory from the small midnight station worth sharing before we continue our journey tonight. This one from Lucia's own early years tending the station, long before she had gathered enough experience to feel truly confident in her quiet, important work. In her very first winter as station master, a frightened young mother arrived one bitter night, carrying a small sleeping baby, wrapped tightly in blankets, clearly fleeing some difficult situation, her eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. Lucia, still uncertain in her new role, felt suddenly overwhelmed, unsure exactly what to say or do. She remembered Joseph's calm example, but found herself struggling to summon the same steady confidence he always seemed to carry so effortlessly. "Please," the young mother whispered, her voice trembling, "I do not know where this train goes. I only know I cannot stay where I was." Lucia sat down beside her, quietly, exactly as Joseph had once taught her, though her own hands trembled slightly with uncertainty. She said very little at first, simply offering her presence, and a warm blanket from the small station office, wrapped gently around the mother's shoulders. Slowly, the young mother began speaking, sharing fragments of a difficult, frightening situation at home, and Lucia listened patiently, resisting her own nervous urge to offer quick advice or easy solutions, remembering instead Joseph's gentle wisdom about simply providing calm, patient company. When the midnight train finally arrived, the young mother hesitated at the platform's edge, her baby stirring gently in her arms. "Will it be all right?" she asked Lucia softly, searching her face for reassurance. Lucia, drawing on every ounce of calm she could gather, met her eyes steadily. "I cannot promise you everything will be easy," she said honestly, "but this train has carried many frightened people toward new, better beginnings. You are not alone in this journey, even though it may feel that way right now." The young mother nodded slowly, drew a deep breath, and finally boarded the train, disappearing into the warm glow of its lit windows as it pulled slowly away into the dark night. Lucia stood alone on the platform afterward, her heart still racing slightly from the intensity of the encounter, wondering quietly if she had truly said and done enough. Weeks later, a short letter arrived at the small station, addressed simply to the kind station master. Inside, the young mother wrote briefly of her successful new beginning in a distant town, thanking Lucia warmly for her patient calm during such a frightening night. Lucia read the letter several times, tears gathering quietly in her eyes, before carefully placing it in a small drawer in the station office, alongside a growing collection of similar grateful notes she would receive over her many years of faithful service. From that difficult first winter onward, Lucia never again doubted her own quiet capability, understanding now, through genuine experience, exactly what Joseph had always known, that steady calm is not something we must feel perfectly and confidently from the very beginning, but something we grow into slowly, gently, one difficult night at a time, exactly like the patient light of the small station lamp itself, glowing steadily night after night, regardless of how uncertain the hand that first lit it may have felt. Chapter 6. The Garden Behind the Wall. In an old, crowded city, behind a tall stone wall covered in green ivy, there was a secret garden that almost nobody knew existed. The wall had stood for over 100 years, and most people who walked past it every day never even noticed the small, hidden wooden door, half covered by climbing plants, tucked quietly into one corner. A young girl named Sophia discovered this door completely by accident. She lived in a small apartment nearby with her mother, and one afternoon, while chasing a stray cat down a narrow alley, she found herself standing in front of the old wall, staring at the small hidden door. Curious, she pushed gently against it. To her great surprise, the door creaked open slowly, revealing a garden unlike anything she had ever seen. Tall trees, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze, soft green grass, untouched and wild, flowers of every color, growing freely without any order, climbing over old stone benches, and around a small, quiet fountain in the center. Sophia stepped inside carefully, her eyes wide with wonder. The noise of the busy city outside seemed to disappear completely, replaced by the soft sound of birds singing, and gentle water trickling from the old fountain. An elderly woman sat on one of the stone benches, tending quietly to a small patch of flowers. She looked up when she heard Sophia's soft footsteps. "Well now," the woman said, smiling warmly, "it has been a very long time since a new visitor found their way here." "I am sorry," Sophia said quickly. "I did not mean to intrude. I did not know this garden was here." "Do not apologize," the woman said kindly. "This garden has been waiting a long time for someone new to discover it." My name is Beatrice. I have taken care of this garden for almost 50 years. Sophia looked around in amazement. How is this possible? Nobody outside seems to know it exists. Beatrice smiled gently, continuing her careful work among the flowers. Many years ago, she said, this garden belonged to a wealthy family, but over time the family disappeared, one by one, moving away or passing on, until finally, only the garden remained, quiet and forgotten behind its tall wall. I found it, much like you did, when I was young, lost and searching for a quiet place away from a difficult home. I decided, that very day, that I would take care of it, and I have kept that promise ever since. Sophia sat down slowly on a soft patch of grass, still looking around at the peaceful garden with wide, curious eyes. Can I come back again? She asked hopefully. Of course, said Beatrice. This garden belongs to anyone who needs a quiet place to rest their heart, even for just a little while. From that day onward, Sophia visited the secret garden often, especially on difficult days, when the noisy city outside felt too loud, too crowded, too overwhelming. She helped Beatrice care for the flowers, learning slowly how to plant new seeds, how to gently remove weeds without harming the flowers nearby, how to listen closely to which plants needed more water and which needed more sunlight. Gardens teach us patience, Beatrice told her one warm afternoon, as they knelt together beside a row of young seedlings. You cannot rush a flower to bloom. You can only give it what it needs, consistently, gently, and then wait, with patience and trust, for it to become what it is meant to become, in its own time. Sophia thought of her own life outside the garden walls, her difficult schoolwork, her worries about the future, her impatience to grow up quickly. Beatrice's words settled softly in her heart, like seeds finding good soil. Years passed slowly and gently, the way seasons always do. Sophia grew from a curious young girl into a thoughtful young woman, and through all those years, the secret garden remained her quiet refuge, her peaceful place to think, to rest, and to grow, just like the flowers around her. Eventually, as Beatrice grew older and her hands grew too weak for the daily work, Sophia took over the full care of the garden, exactly as Beatrice once had, many years before. And in time, just as Sophia had once discovered the small hidden door by accident, other lost, curious souls found their own way inside, discovering the quiet garden's peaceful magic for themselves. The secret garden behind the old stone wall continued this way for many, many years, quietly passed from one gentle caretaker to the next, always waiting patiently behind its hidden door, for anyone who needed a peaceful place to rest, to breathe slowly, and to remember that even in the middle of a busy, noisy world, quiet, gentle places still exist, patiently waiting to be found. Tonight, imagine that hidden door, tucked behind climbing green ivy. Imagine pushing it open slowly and stepping into that quiet, peaceful garden, the noise of the world fading gently behind you. Let your mind rest there for a while, among the soft grass and gentle flowers, breathing slowly, patiently, until sleep finds you, just as gently as Sophia once found her own secret, peaceful place. Let us stay a little longer in the secret garden, before we continue our journey tonight. Many years passed after Sophia took over full care of the hidden garden from Beatrice. She tended it faithfully, exactly as her old teacher once had, welcoming quiet visitors who discovered the small hidden door by chance, offering them the same peaceful refuge she had once found for herself. One difficult winter, a teenage boy named Raphael discovered the garden, much as Sophia once had, wandering through the narrow alley behind the old stone wall, while trying to escape from a group of unkind classmates who often teased him at school. He pushed against the small wooden door, and to his surprise, it opened easily. Stepping inside, he found himself standing in the quiet, peaceful garden, the noise of the city disappearing instantly behind him. Sophia, now an older woman herself, sat on the same stone bench where she had once found Beatrice many years before, tending carefully to a patch of winter flowers. Well now, she said warmly, looking up at the surprised young boy. It has been quite a while since someone new found their way here. Raphael looked around nervously, unsure if he was allowed to be there. I am sorry, he said quickly. I did not know this place existed. I was just trying to get away from some difficult classmates. Sophia smiled gently, recognizing immediately the familiar hurt behind his words. This garden has welcomed many people over the years who needed exactly that, a quiet place to get away from something difficult, even if just for a little while. She invited him to sit, and slowly, Over several visits throughout that difficult winter, Raphael began sharing more about his troubles at school, about feeling different from his classmates, about struggling to find friends who understood him. Sophia listened patiently, never rushing him, simply offering quiet company and gentle wisdom, exactly as Beatrice had once offered her. "You know," Sophia told him one afternoon, as they worked together planting new seeds for the coming spring, "this garden looks quite bare and empty right now, in the middle of winter, but underneath the soil, right now, tiny seeds are quietly preparing themselves, gathering strength, waiting patiently for the right moment to grow." Sometimes, difficult periods in our own lives work the very same way. We may feel bare and empty on the outside, but quietly, patiently, we are still growing, still preparing, even when it does not feel that way. Raphael thought about her words carefully, watching his own hands carefully press small seeds into the cool, dark soil. As spring slowly arrived and the garden began blooming once again, vibrant and colorful after its quiet winter rest, Raphael noticed something changing within himself too. He felt calmer at school, more confident, better able to handle the unkind words of his classmates without letting them hurt him so deeply. One warm spring afternoon, Raphael arrived at the garden with a wide, genuine smile. "I made a new friend today," he announced proudly. "Another boy, who also gets teased sometimes. We talked at lunch, and I think, maybe, we understand each other." Sophia's eyes warmed with quiet pride. "That is wonderful news," she said. "You see, Raphael? Even during your own quiet winter, you were growing steadily, preparing carefully, for exactly this kind of new, warm friendship to bloom." End quote. As the years passed, Raphael continued visiting the secret garden regularly, though less often, since his life outside its walls grew fuller, happier, richer with genuine friendships and growing confidence. But he never forgot the quiet lessons Sophia had gently taught him during that difficult winter, and eventually, when he grew older himself, he too began bringing other struggling young visitors to the garden, continuing faithfully the same gentle tradition that had been passed, quietly and patiently, from caretaker to caretaker, for so many generations. One final gentle memory from the secret garden deserves sharing before we continue our journey tonight. Many years after Raphael first discovered the hidden garden as a troubled teenager, he returned one final time as a grown man, now himself a schoolteacher, bringing with him a small group of his own students who often struggled, much as he once had, with feeling different or misunderstood among their classmates. Sophia, now quite elderly, though still faithfully tending the garden each day, welcomed them warmly at the small hidden door. "This garden," Raphael told his curious students, as they stepped inside the peaceful space, "once helped me through a very difficult time in my own life. I wanted you to discover it too, exactly as I once discovered it myself." The children explored quietly, marveling at the tall trees, the soft grass, the gentle fountain trickling peacefully in the garden's center. Sophia watched warmly, remembering her own childhood wonder upon first discovering this same peaceful place, so many decades before. One particularly quiet student, a girl named Petra who rarely spoke at school, wandered slowly toward Sophia, watching curiously as the old woman tended carefully to a patch of delicate flowers. "Can I help?" Petra asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Sophia smiled warmly, welcoming her gently. "Of course," she said. "Gardens always welcome patient, gentle hands." As they worked together quietly, Sophia noticed Petra's careful, thoughtful attention to each small task, much like her own quiet nature many years before. "You remind me of myself when I first discovered this garden," Sophia said gently. "Sometimes, quiet people simply need a quiet place, where their gentle nature is not seen as a weakness but understood, instead, as a genuine strength." Petra looked up at her, surprised and comforted by these unexpected words. By the end of their visit, Petra had grown noticeably more relaxed, more willing to speak softly with the other children about the flowers they had planted together. As Raphael gathered his students to leave, Sophia pulled him aside gently. "Your quiet student," she whispered. "The one who worked beside me. She needs patient encouragement, exactly like this garden once offered both of us." Raphael nodded warmly, understanding deeply, and in the weeks that followed, he made a quiet, deliberate effort to offer Petra the same gentle patience and understanding that this small, hidden garden had so faithfully offered him, so many years before, continuing faithfully the same gentle chain of quiet kindness that had passed patiently, generation after generation, through the small wooden door hidden behind the old stone wall. One further quiet memory from the secret garden deserves mention before we continue our journey tonight. Long after Sophia herself had grown too old to tend the garden daily, and Petra, the once quiet student, had taken over its patient care, the small hidden door behind the old stone wall continued welcoming new, curious visitors, exactly as it always had. Petra kept a small wooden sign, hidden discreetly near the entrance, reading simply, "For anyone who needs a quiet place to rest their heart, even for just a little while." Children who once played timidly within its walls grew into adults who returned, years later, sometimes bringing their own children, continuing faithfully a tradition none of them could quite explain, except to say that something about that quiet, hidden space, tucked gently behind an old forgotten wall, seemed to hold exactly the kind of patient, gentle peace that a busy, noisy world so often forgot to offer. There is one more full memory from the secret garden worth sharing before we continue our journey tonight. This one from a particularly difficult season during Petra's own years caring for the hidden space. A severe drought settled over the city one summer, and for many weeks, water grew increasingly scarce throughout the whole region. Petra watched with growing worry as her beloved flowers began wilting despite her most careful efforts, the soil growing hard and cracked beneath the relentless sun. One afternoon, an elderly neighbor who lived near the old stone wall, a woman named Constance who had watched the secret garden quietly from her own window for many years without ever venturing inside, knocked gently on the small hidden door. "I have watched you tend this place faithfully for a long time now," Constance said, when Petra opened the door in surprise. "I have extra water saved from my own careful rationing. Would you accept some help for your garden?" Touched deeply by this unexpected kindness, Petra accepted gratefully, and over the following difficult weeks, several other neighbors, having noticed Constance's quiet generosity, began contributing their own small amounts of saved water as well, each one wanting to help preserve the peaceful garden that had, in some quiet way, touched their own lives over the years, even those who had never once stepped through its hidden door. "I do not understand," Petra admitted one evening to Constance, as they worked together carefully watering the struggling flowers. "Why do so many people care so deeply about a garden most of them have never even entered?" Constance smiled warmly, wiping dust gently from her weathered hands. "Some things," she said thoughtfully, "matter to a community simply because they exist. Quietly, faithfully, patiently, regardless of whether we personally experience them every day. Knowing this garden exists, hidden peacefully behind this old wall, has comforted me for years, even though, until today, I never once stepped inside it myself. Sometimes, simply knowing that quiet, gentle places still exist in our busy world is enough to bring genuine comfort, all on its own. Thanks to this unexpected community generosity, the garden survived the difficult drought season, its flowers slowly recovering their vibrant color once the rains finally returned. And from that summer onward, the once secret garden became a little less secret, its small hidden door occasionally left open now during quiet afternoons, welcoming curious neighbors who had, during that difficult dry season, finally discovered the peaceful sanctuary that had quietly watched over their own busy lives for so many patient years. Chapter 7. The Fisherman and the Quiet Sea. In a small fishing village, where the houses were painted in soft blues and whites, there lived an old fisherman named Nikos. Every morning, long before sunrise, Nikos walked down to the harbor, climbed into his small wooden boat, and sailed out onto the quiet sea. Nikos had been fishing these same waters for over 60 years. He knew every current, every rock, every place where the fish liked to gather. But more than his skill, the younger fishermen in the village admired his calm. No matter how difficult the day, no matter how empty his nets sometimes came back, Nikos never seemed worried. One young fisherman, named Petros, once asked him about this. "Nikos," he said, as they prepared their boats together one morning, "how do you stay so calm? Some days I catch nothing at all, and I return home worried about feeding my family. But you always seem peaceful, even on your worst days." Nikos smiled, tying a rope carefully around a wooden post. "Let me tell you something my own father taught me, many years ago," he said. "The sea does not owe us anything. It gives generously some days, and gives little on other days, and it does this not because it is angry with us, or pleased with us, but simply because that is the sea's nature. My worry changes nothing about what the sea decides to give. So instead, I focus only on what I can control, preparing my nets carefully, choosing good places to fish, working with patience and skill. The rest, I release into the sea's own hands." Petros thought about these words as they sailed out together that morning. The sea was calm and gray under the early morning sky, small waves rocking their boats gently. That day, Petros caught very little, while Nikos, working the same waters nearby, returned with a good catch, as he often did. But instead of feeling jealous or frustrated, Petros found himself remembering Nikos's calm words, and slowly, over many months of working alongside the old fisherman, he began to understand their deeper meaning. One particularly difficult season, when storms kept the fishing boats in the harbor for many days and the whole village grew worried about food and money, Nikos remained just as calm as always. He spent those stormy days repairing his nets, fixing small cracks in his boat, and sharing quiet meals with his neighbors. "Are you not worried?" Petros asked him one evening, as they sat together in the small village tavern, listening to rain drumming steadily against the windows. "Worry," said Nikos slowly, "is like rowing a boat that is already tied firmly to the dock. It uses all your strength, and yet, the boat does not move even one small inch. Instead, I prepare. I make sure my boat and my nets are ready for the very moment the storm passes, so that when the sea calms again, I am ready to sail out immediately, without wasting a single moment." When the storm finally passed, exactly as Nikos had predicted, he was indeed the very first boat out on the water, and his careful preparation meant a strong, healthy catch that day, enough to help many families in the village through the difficult time. Years passed, and Petros grew from a young, anxious fisherman into a calm, experienced one himself, much like Nikos had been for him. He began teaching younger fishermen the very same lessons Nikos had once taught him: prepare carefully, work patiently, and release your worry into the sea's own quiet hands. When Nikos finally grew too old to sail out every morning, he still walked down to the harbor each day, sitting quietly on an old wooden bench, watching the boats sail out and return, content simply to watch the sea he had known and loved his entire long life. "Are you sad," Petros once asked him, "that you cannot sail out with us anymore?" Nikos smiled, his eyes still bright despite his age. "The sea and I have had 60 wonderful years together," he said. "Now, it is enough simply to sit quietly and watch it breathe, in and out, exactly as it always has, exactly as it always will, long after I am gone too. If tonight your own mind feels heavy with worry, remember old Nikos and his quiet, patient wisdom. Remember that worry rarely changes anything, but calm preparation and patient trust often do. Let your own worries drift gently away tonight, out onto a calm, quiet sea, releasing them slowly into the dark, patient water, until your own mind, like that peaceful sea, becomes calm and still. Let us stay a little longer beside the quiet sea, before we continue our journey tonight." Many years after Petros first learned Nikos's calm wisdom about worry and preparation, he became, himself, an old and respected fisherman in the small village, teaching the very same lessons to a new generation of young fishermen, just beginning their own careers on the water. One particularly difficult year, a terrible sickness affected the fish populations along the coast, and for many months, every fisherman in the village, no matter how skilled or experienced, returned with nets far emptier than usual. The whole village grew worried, wondering how they would manage through such a difficult season. A young fisherman named Dmitri, newly married with a baby on the way, grew especially anxious. Each evening he returned to the harbor with barely enough fish to feed his own small family, let alone sell at the market for extra money. Petros, now himself an elder in the village, noticed the young man's growing distress, and one evening, he invited Dmitri to sit with him on the old wooden bench overlooking the harbor, exactly where he himself had once sat with Nikos many years before. "I do not know what to do," Dmitri admitted, his voice heavy with worry. "My wife is expecting our first child soon, and I cannot provide enough. I fear I have chosen the wrong life for my family." Petros listened patiently, remembering clearly his own early worries as a young fisherman, worries that Nikos had once gently helped him understand. "Let me share something an old friend once taught me," Petros said gently. "The sea does not owe us anything. It gives generously some years, and gives little in other years, not because it is punishing us, but simply because that is its nature, as unpredictable and patient as life itself." Dmitri listened carefully, though worry still clouded his young face. "But," Petros continued, "just because the sea gives little right now, does not mean it will always give little. The fish will return, exactly as they always have, after every difficult season throughout our village's long history. Your work now is not to worry about what you cannot control, but to prepare patiently, carefully, for the moment when the sea becomes generous once again. How do I prepare when there is so little to work with? Dmitri asked. Petros smiled gently. Use this quiet time wisely, he said. Repair your nets carefully so they are ready the moment the fish return. Learn new fishing techniques from the older fishermen, like myself, who have survived many difficult seasons before this one. And most importantly, trust that difficult seasons, like storms, always eventually pass, even when they feel endless while we are living through them. Encouraged by Petros's calm wisdom, Dmitri began spending his quiet mornings repairing his nets meticulously, and his afternoons learning patiently from Petros and other experienced fishermen, absorbing decades of hard-earned knowledge about reading tides, understanding fish patterns, and preparing thoroughly for future success. Slowly, as autumn turned to winter, and winter finally began softening toward spring, the fish populations along the coast began recovering, exactly as the older fishermen had patiently predicted. And when the fish finally returned in healthy numbers once again, Dmitri, having spent the difficult season preparing so carefully, found himself remarkably ready, his nets strong and well-mended, his fishing skills sharpened considerably by months of patient learning. That season, Dmitri's catches grew steadily stronger, providing well for his growing family, including his new daughter, born healthy just as the first warm days of spring arrived. Years later, when his own daughter grew old enough to ask him about difficult times, Dmitri told her the story of that hard season and the patient wisdom Petros had shared with him on the old wooden bench overlooking the harbor. The sea teaches us patience, he told her gently, echoing words passed down now through 3 generations of fishermen in their small village. Worry changes nothing, but patient preparation and quiet trust carry us steadily through even the most difficult seasons of our lives. One final quiet memory from the fishing village deserves sharing before we continue our journey tonight. Many years later, when Dmitri himself had grown into a respected elder fisherman, his own daughter, now grown and expecting her first child, asked him to teach her the old skills of fishing, wanting to carry forward the family tradition into a new generation. At first, Dmitri hesitated, worried about the physical demands of the difficult, sometimes dangerous work. But remembering clearly Petros's patient wisdom, and Nikos's before that, he finally agreed, teaching his daughter carefully, patiently, exactly as he himself had once been taught. One difficult morning, a sudden storm arose while they were out on the water together, the sky darkening rapidly, waves growing rough and unpredictable beneath their small boat. His daughter grew visibly frightened, her hands gripping the boat's edge tightly. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. Dmitri remained calm, exactly as Petros had once remained calm during his own early, anxious years. "We do not panic," he said steadily. "We prepare carefully, and we trust our careful preparation to carry us safely through." Together they secured their nets quickly, adjusted their sails skillfully, and guided their small boat steadily back toward the safety of the harbor, arriving safely just as the storm reached its fiercest intensity. Once safely ashore, his daughter, still shaking slightly from the frightening experience, looked at her father with newfound admiration. "How were you so calm?" she asked. "I was terrified." Dmitri smiled gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Fear is natural," he said, "but calm preparation, patiently practiced over many years, eventually becomes stronger than fear itself. Someday, you will feel this same calm too, once your own hands have practiced these skills long enough to trust them fully." True to his words, over the following months and years, his daughter continued learning patiently alongside him, and slowly, gradually, she too developed the same calm, steady confidence that had been passed faithfully down through 3 generations of fishermen in their small coastal village, from Nikos to Petros to Dmitri, and now, finally, to her. One further quiet memory from the fishing village deserves mention before we continue our journey tonight. Generations later, long after Nikos, Petros, and Dmitri had all passed peacefully, their names still lived on quietly in the small village, spoken respectfully by younger fishermen who had never met any of them personally, but who had learned, faithfully, the very same patient wisdom passed carefully down through each generation. The old wooden bench overlooking the harbor became known simply, affectionately, as the quiet bench, where troubled young fishermen instinctively gathered whenever worry grew too heavy to carry alone. An old woman in the village, whose own grandfather had once fished alongside Nikos himself, liked to tell curious visitors a simple, gentle truth about their small coastal community. The sea teaches patience to everyone who listens carefully enough, generation after generation. We simply try, here, to make sure someone is always sitting quietly on that old bench, ready to help each new generation listen a little more closely. There is one more full memory from the fishing village worth sharing before we continue our journey tonight. From a particularly frightening night during Dimitri's own later years as an experienced fisherman. A sudden violent storm arose one evening, while several younger fishermen were still out on the water, having ignored the early warning signs that Dimitri, with his decades of careful experience, had noticed clearly in the shifting winds and darkening horizon hours before. As the storm intensified rapidly, word spread through the village that 3 young fishermen, including Dimitri's own nephew, remained dangerously out at sea, their small boats struggling against increasingly violent waves. Without hesitation, Dimitri gathered several of the village's most experienced sailors, and together, they prepared the sturdiest boat available, determined to guide their younger neighbors safely home despite the dangerous conditions. "This is foolish and dangerous," one worried village elder warned him, as Dimitri prepared to sail out into the darkening storm himself. "You risk your own life for this." Dimitri paused only briefly, remembering clearly Petros's old wisdom about calm preparation overcoming fear. "I have prepared my entire life for exactly this kind of night," he said steadily. "I will not let fear stop me now, when my preparation finally matters most." Guided by decades of intimate knowledge about the coastline's dangerous rocks and hidden currents, knowledge passed down faithfully from Nikos to Petros and finally to himself, Dimitri navigated skillfully through the violent storm, his careful, patient training now serving its ultimate, life-saving purpose. After several harrowing hours battling powerful waves and near-blinding rain, Dimitri and his fellow rescuers finally located the 3 young fishermen, their small boats badly damaged but still afloat, the frightened young men clinging desperately to whatever secure handholds they could find. Working carefully and methodically, exactly as decades of patient practice had trained him, Dimitri guided each young fisherman safely aboard his own sturdy boat, before carefully navigating the difficult, dangerous journey back toward the safety of the harbor. The entire village gathered anxiously at the docks, watching through driving rain as Dimitri's boat finally appeared, safely carrying all 3 grateful young fishermen home. Cheers and relieved tears mixed together as families embraced their safely returned loved ones. Later that night, once the storm had finally passed and calm returned to the exhausted village, Dimitri's nephew approached him quietly, still shaken from his frightening ordeal. "How are you not afraid, sailing out into that terrible storm?" he asked, genuine wonder in his tired voice. Dimitri smiled gently, placing a steady hand on his nephew's shoulder. "I was afraid," he admitted honestly. "But decades of patient preparation taught me to trust my own careful skill, even while feeling afraid. Someday, when your own skills have been patiently practiced long enough, you too will find this same quiet courage within yourself." That difficult, frightening night became, in time, one of the village's most cherished stories, told and retold for many years afterward, a powerful testament to the quiet, patient wisdom passed faithfully down through 3 generations of dedicated fishermen, wisdom that had, on that particular stormy night, ultimately saved 3 precious young lives. Chapter 8: The Library That Never Closed. In an old university town there stood a large library, famous for one unusual thing. It never closed its doors, not even for a single night, in over 100 years. Day and night, its warm lights glowed softly through tall windows, welcoming anyone who needed a quiet place to read, to think, or simply to rest. The librarian who worked the night shift was a quiet, thoughtful man named Aldrich. Every evening, as the sun went down and most of the town settled into sleep, Aldrich arrived at the library, ready to spend the long, quiet hours among the tall shelves of books. Very few visitors came during the deep night hours, but those who did often carried something heavy with them, some worry or sadness that kept them from sleeping peacefully at home. Aldrich had learned, over many years, to recognize these quiet, troubled visitors, and he always greeted them gently, without ever asking too many questions. One night, a young student named Wren arrived at the library close to midnight, her eyes tired and red, an unfinished, worrying assignment weighing heavily on her mind. She sat down at a quiet table near the back, surrounded by tall shelves, and stared blankly at her books, unable to focus. Aldrich noticed her from across the room, and after a while, he approached quietly, carrying a small cup of warm tea. "You looked like you could use this," he said gently, setting the cup down beside her. Ren looked up, startled slightly. "Thank you," she said softly. "I am sorry if I look upset. I just cannot seem to focus tonight. My mind feels too full, too tired." Aldrich nodded understandingly, sitting down quietly in the chair across from her. "May I share something with you?" he asked gently. Ren nodded. "This library," Aldrich said, "holds thousands of books, written by thousands of different people, across hundreds of years. Every single one of them, at some point, felt exactly like you feel right now. Tired, worried, unable to focus, uncertain if their work would ever be good enough. And yet, here their books sit, quiet and complete, proof that they found their way through those difficult nights, one small step at a time." Ren looked around at the tall shelves surrounding her, filled with countless books, each one representing someone else's difficult, uncertain journey, finished at last. "Sometimes," Aldrich continued, "when our minds feel too full, the kindest thing we can do is rest for a moment, rather than force ourselves to keep pushing. Drink your tea slowly. Rest your eyes for a few minutes. The words will still be here when you return to them, and your mind will be calmer and clearer for having paused." Ren took his advice, closing her eyes for just a few quiet minutes, listening to the soft, comforting silence of the library around her, broken only by the occasional gentle turn of a page somewhere among the tall shelves. When she opened her eyes again, her mind did feel calmer, exactly as Aldrich had promised. She returned to her assignment with fresh, patient focus, and by early morning, as the first light of dawn began to soften the sky outside the tall windows, she finished her work. "Thank you," she said to Aldrich, as she gathered her books to leave. "I do not think I could have finished tonight without your kindness." Aldrich smiled warmly. "The library is always here," he said, "day or night, whenever your mind needs a quiet place to rest and think clearly again." Over the following years, Ren returned often to the library during difficult, sleepless nights, and always, Aldrich was there, offering quiet company, warm tea, and gentle wisdom exactly when it was needed most. Many years later, after Ren had grown older and become a professor herself, she often told her own students about the library that never closed, and the quiet night librarian who taught her that rest, patience, and gentle pauses were just as important to good work as effort and determination. If your own mind feels too full and tired tonight, imagine yourself walking into that quiet, warm library, its soft lights glowing gently through tall windows. Imagine sitting down at a quiet table, a warm cup of tea beside you, surrounded by countless books, each one proof that difficult nights always, eventually, come to a gentle, peaceful end. Let your own tired mind rest now, patient and calm, until sleep gently carries you through the night. Let us stay a little longer in the quiet library before we continue our journey tonight. Many years after Ren first met Aldrich during that difficult, sleepless night, she returned to the university town, now as a respected professor herself, to give a special lecture at her old university. During her visit, she decided to walk once more through the familiar streets toward the old library that had helped her through so many difficult nights during her own student years. To her surprise and quiet joy, she found the library exactly as she remembered it, its warm lights still glowing softly through tall windows, welcoming late-night visitors exactly as it always had. Stepping inside, she wondered if Aldrich still worked there, all these years later. Walking slowly between the familiar tall shelves, she eventually spotted him, older now, his hair completely gray, but his gentle, thoughtful presence exactly the same as she remembered. "Aldrich," she said softly, approaching him carefully. He turned, and after a moment of careful study, recognition slowly warmed his tired eyes. "Ren," he said, smiling warmly, "I wondered if you would ever return." They sat together at the very same quiet table near the back of the library where they had first spoken, many years before, and Ren told him about her journey since that difficult night, her graduation, her years of hard work, and finally, her recent achievement of becoming a professor herself. "I often think of that night," she admitted, "of the tea you brought me, and the wisdom you shared about rest and patience. It helped me not only that night, but throughout my entire career since then." Aldrich listened warmly, quiet pride evident in his gentle expression. "I am glad," he said. "Though I must confess, I have shared that very same wisdom with countless tired students since that night, and each time, I think of you, and wonder how you are doing, out there in the wider world." "I brought something for you," Ren said, reaching into her bag and pulling out a small book, its cover simple and elegant. "My first published book. I dedicated it, in part, to a quiet librarian who taught me that rest is just as important as effort." Aldrich took the book carefully, his eyes glistening slightly with quiet emotion as he read the dedication inside. "Thank you," he said softly. "This means more to me than you know." They talked for a while longer, catching up on years of separate journeys, until finally, Ren mentioned she needed to prepare for her lecture the following morning. "Before you go," Aldrich said, "let me share something with you, since perhaps now, you are the one who needs to hear it, in this new stage of your life." Ren listened attentively. "Being a professor," Aldrich said gently, "means guiding many students through their own difficult, uncertain nights, much like this library has always done. Remember, as you guide them, that sometimes the greatest gift you can offer is not always answers or solutions, but simply patient, quiet company and gentle permission to rest when their minds grow too full and tired." Ren nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the deep wisdom in his words, wisdom she now carried forward into her own new role guiding young students. As she left the library that evening, walking back out into the cool night air, she glanced back one final time at the warm, glowing windows and felt a deep, quiet gratitude for the library that never closed, and the gentle night librarian whose patient wisdom had guided her so faithfully, all those years ago, and continued guiding her still, even now, into her own new chapter of teaching and guiding others. One final quiet memory from the library that never closed deserves sharing before we continue our journey tonight. Years after Ren's warm visit, Aldrich himself finally grew too old to continue his beloved nightly work. On his very last evening at the library, the staff quietly organized a small, heartfelt gathering to honor his many decades of gentle service. To his great surprise, many former students, now grown into successful adults, quietly returned that evening, each one carrying warm memories of a difficult night when Aldrich's patient kindness had guided them gently through overwhelming stress or worry. One by one, they shared their stories: a doctor who once struggled desperately with her medical examinations, a lawyer who once doubted his own abilities during a difficult case, a musician who once feared her creative dreams were impossible. Each story different, yet each one carrying the same quiet thread of gratitude for Aldrich's gentle late-night wisdom. "I never realized," Aldrich said softly, visibly moved by their heartfelt words, "how many quiet nights, and how many tired, worried students I had the privilege of sitting beside all these years." A young librarian named Soren, chosen carefully to continue Aldrich's beloved night shift, approached him quietly near the end of the gathering. "I am nervous," Soren admitted honestly. "I do not know if I can offer the same wisdom you have offered so many people for so many years." Aldrich smiled warmly, placing a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. "You do not need to have all the answers," he said gently. "You simply need patience, genuine kindness, and a willingness to sit quietly beside someone struggling, offering simply your calm, steady presence. The rest, in time, will follow naturally." As Aldrich finally left the library for the very last time, walking slowly out into the cool night air, he looked back one final time at the warm, glowing windows, feeling deeply grateful for the countless quiet nights he had spent there, gently guiding so many tired, uncertain souls safely through their own difficult chapters, exactly as the library itself had faithfully done, night after night, for over 100 patient years. One further quiet memory from the library that never closed deserves mention before we continue our journey tonight. Years after Soren took over the beloved night shift, he began a small, quiet tradition of his own, leaving a simple handwritten note beside the warm tea he offered each troubled late-night visitor. A note containing only a few gentle words, chosen carefully for that particular person's struggle. Students began saving these small notes, tucking them carefully into their own books, carrying Soren's patient kindness forward with them long after they graduated and moved on into their own busy lives. Decades later, historians researching the university's long history noted, with quiet fascination, that this small, unassuming library, still glowing warmly through the night, exactly as it always had for over 150 years now, remained one of the most beloved, most quietly cherished places on the entire campus, not because of its impressive collection of books, though that collection was indeed vast and valuable, but simply because of the patient, gentle tradition of quiet kindness that had been so faithfully passed, night after night, from one thoughtful librarian to the next. Chapter 9. The Traveler and the Mountain Village High in the Mountains, where the air was thin and cool, and clouds often drifted gently below the village rooftops. There was a small settlement called Alto Vale. It could only be reached by a long, winding path, walked on foot for many hours, through quiet pine forests and rocky mountain passes. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, a tired traveler named Ines arrived at the edge of the village. She had been walking for 3 long days, carrying only a small bag, running from a busy, stressful life in the city far below, searching for a place to think clearly again. An old woman named Yara, who lived in the first small house at the village entrance, noticed the tired traveler and invited her inside without hesitation. "You look like you have walked a very long way," Yara said kindly, offering Ines a simple meal of warm soup and fresh bread. 3 days, Ines admitted, gratefully accepting the food. "I needed to get away from everything. My work, my worries, the constant noise of the city. I heard about this village from a friend, who said it was the quietest place in the whole country." Yara smiled warmly. "It is indeed very quiet here," she said. "But I have learned, over many years, that true quiet is not simply about the absence of noise outside. It is about finding stillness inside yourself too." Ines stayed in the small mountain village for several days, resting in Yara's simple guest room, eating quiet meals, and walking slowly through the peaceful mountain paths surrounding the village. Each morning she watched the sunrise slowly light up the valley below, the soft mist rising gently from the trees. One afternoon, Yara invited Ines to help her tend the small vegetable garden behind her house. As they worked together, pulling weeds gently from between rows of vegetables, Yara spoke softly. "When I was young," she said, "I also left this village for many years, searching for excitement in the busy cities below. I thought quiet mountain life was boring, unimportant. I wanted noise, speed, constant activity." "What made you return?" Ines asked curiously. Yara paused, looking thoughtfully at the mountains surrounding them. "After many years of busy city life," she said, "I realized something important. All that noise, all that constant activity, had filled my days completely, but had left my mind feeling empty and tired. I had forgotten how to simply sit quietly with my own thoughts, without needing constant distraction. So, I returned home, to this quiet village, to relearn that simple, forgotten skill." Ines thought about her own busy, noisy life in the city, filled constantly with notifications, meetings, deadlines, and endless small distractions, leaving little quiet space for her own thoughts to settle and become clear. Over the following days, under Yara's gentle guidance, Ines began practicing this forgotten skill herself. Each morning, she sat quietly by the window, watching the mist slowly clear from the valley below, simply breathing, simply thinking, without reaching for any distraction. At first, the quiet felt strange, even slightly uncomfortable. Her mind, so used to constant noise and activity, felt restless without it. But slowly, day by day, this restlessness began to soften, replaced gradually by a calm, clear stillness she had not felt in many years. "I understand now," Ines told Yara one evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountain peaks in soft gold. "The noise outside was never really the problem. It was the noise inside my own mind, the constant restless thoughts, that I truly needed to quiet." Yara nodded warmly. "Exactly," she said. "The mountains did not fix anything for you. They simply gave you the quiet space needed to fix it gently, yourself." When Ines finally returned to her busy life in the city below, she carried this quiet lesson with her. Even amid the noise and constant activity, she began setting aside small moments each day, simply to sit quietly, to breathe slowly, and to let her restless thoughts settle gently, just as she had learned in the peaceful mountain village. Years later, Ines returned often to Alto Vale, sometimes bringing friends who needed the very same quiet lesson she once learned there herself. And Yara, though older now, still welcomed each tired traveler exactly the same way she always had, with warm soup, gentle wisdom, and patient, quiet company. Tonight, imagine yourself walking that long, winding mountain path, tired from a long journey, finally arriving at a small, peaceful village high above the noisy world below. Imagine sitting quietly by a window, watching soft mist clear gently from a valley, your restless thoughts slowly settling, like calm water after a stone has fully sunk beneath its surface. Let that same peaceful stillness settle now within your own mind, patient and gentle, as you drift slowly toward sleep. Let us stay a little longer in the quiet mountain village before we continue our journey tonight. Several years after Ines first learned the gentle lesson of inner stillness from Yara, she returned once again to Alto Vale, this time bringing with her a close friend from the city, a busy architect named Felix, who had grown increasingly stressed and exhausted from years of demanding work and constant deadlines. "I do not understand how a quiet mountain village could possibly help," Felix admitted skeptically, as they walked the long, winding path toward the small settlement. "I have tried relaxing before. It never seems to work for very long." Ines smiled knowingly, remembering her own initial skepticism years before. "Give it a few days," she said gently. "The village does not simply relax you. It teaches you something quieter and more lasting than simple relaxation." They arrived as the sun began setting, and Yara, now considerably older but still warm and welcoming as ever, greeted them both with the same simple hospitality she had once offered Ines. Over the following days, Felix struggled initially with the village's quiet pace. His mind, accustomed to constant busy activity, felt restless and uncomfortable during the long, quiet mornings Yara encouraged him to spend simply sitting, breathing, and observing his own thoughts without judgment. "I cannot stop thinking about work," he confessed to Ines one afternoon, frustration evident in his tired voice. "Even here, surrounded by all this peaceful quiet, my mind keeps racing toward deadlines, meetings, unfinished projects." Ines nodded understandingly. "That happened to me too. In the beginning," she said. "Yara taught me that stillness is not about forcing your mind to stop thinking completely. It is about gently, patiently, observing your thoughts without immediately following each one, the way you might watch clouds drifting slowly across the sky, without needing to chase after every single one." Encouraged by her words, Felix continued practicing this gentle observation each morning, and slowly, over the remaining days of their visit, he began noticing small but meaningful changes. His restless thoughts still arose, but he found himself able to acknowledge them calmly, without immediately becoming tangled and stressed within them. One evening, sitting together with Yara and Ines on a small wooden bench overlooking the misty valley below, Felix finally spoke about his experience. "I think I understand now," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "It is not that my busy thoughts have disappeared completely. It is that I have learned, slowly, to hold them more gently, rather than letting them hold me so tightly." Yara smiled warmly, nodding with quiet satisfaction. "Exactly," she said. "The mountains cannot remove your busy city life, or your important work, but they can teach you to carry both more gently, more peacefully, wherever you go afterward." When Felix finally returned to his busy architectural firm in the city, his colleagues noticed an unmistakable change in him. Though his workload remained just as demanding as before, he seemed calmer, more focused, better able to handle stressful situations without becoming overwhelmed. "What happened to you?" his business partner asked curiously one afternoon, noticing Felix's newfound calm during a particularly stressful project deadline. Felix simply smiled, thinking of quiet mountain mornings, misty valleys, and Yara's gentle, patient wisdom. "I learned to watch my thoughts drift by, like clouds," he said simply, "instead of chasing after every single one." From that point onward, Felix made it a habit to set aside quiet time each morning, even amid his busy city life, to simply sit, breathe, and gently observe his own restless thoughts, carrying with him always that same peaceful stillness he had first discovered high in the quiet mountains of Alto Vale. One final quiet memory from the mountain village of Alto Vale deserves sharing before we continue our journey tonight. Many years later, Yara finally grew too old to continue caring for tired travelers arriving at her small mountain home, and gracefully, she passed this gentle responsibility onto Ines herself, who had by then decided to leave her busy city life permanently, choosing instead to make her home in the quiet mountain village she had once visited, simply to rest. One evening, a young man named Dario, exhausted and overwhelmed after years of demanding work in a distant city, arrived at the village entrance, much as Ines herself had once arrived many years before. Ines welcomed him warmly, offering the same simple hospitality Yara had once offered her: warm soup, a quiet guest room, and gentle, patient company. "I do not know why I came here," Dario admitted honestly, exhaustion evident in his tired voice. "A friend simply told me this place might help." Ines smiled knowingly, remembering clearly her own uncertain arrival years before. "That is exactly how it begins for most of us," she said gently. "Give yourself a few quiet days here, without expecting anything specific. Simply rest, breathe, and observe." Over the following days, Ines guided Dario patiently through the same gentle practices Yara had once taught her. Quiet mornings spent simply observing his own restless thoughts, peaceful walks along familiar mountain paths, and patient, unhurried conversations about the deeper, quieter parts of himself he had long neglected amid his busy city life. By the end of his visit, Dario, much like Felix and Ines before him, began noticing a profound, gentle shift within himself, a calm stillness quietly emerging beneath his previously restless, anxious mind. "Thank you," he said, on his final morning, preparing to return to his busy life below. "I think I finally understand what my friend meant when she said this place would help." Ines smiled warmly, watching him begin his long walk back down the winding mountain path, carrying with him now that same peaceful, patient stillness that had been passed gently, faithfully, from Yara to herself, and now, finally, onward to him, continuing quietly, generation after generation, the same gentle, healing tradition of Alto Vale. One further quiet memory from the mountain village of Alto Vale deserves mention before we continue our journey tonight. Long after Ines herself had grown old, tending faithfully to tired travelers exactly as Yara once had, a small handwritten guest book, kept quietly on a shelf near the entrance, filled slowly over many decades with the quiet reflections of countless visitors, each one arriving exhausted and restless, each one departing calmer, gentler, carrying a small piece of the village's quiet stillness back into their own busy lives. One particular entry, written by a tired traveler many years after Ines herself had passed peacefully, read simply, "I do not know exactly how this quiet place works its gentle magic. I only know that I arrived here heavy, and I leave now, somehow, considerably lighter. Thank you to everyone who has cared so patiently for this small mountain village across so many years." Chapter 10. The Star That Fell into the Field. In a small farming village, surrounded by wide, open fields, there lived a young boy named Emile, who loved nothing more than lying on his back in the tall grass at night, watching the countless stars scattered brightly across the dark sky above him. One clear summer night, as Emile lay quietly in the field behind his family's small farmhouse, he witnessed something extraordinary. A single bright star, far above him, suddenly began to move, streaking slowly and gently across the night sky, before disappearing behind the distant hills. Emile sat up quickly, his heart racing with excitement. He had heard old stories from his grandmother about falling stars, and how, according to old village legends, anyone who found a fallen star and made a wish upon it, the wish would surely come true. The next morning, before anyone else in his family woke up, Emile quietly slipped out of the house and walked toward the distant hills, following the direction he had seen the star fall the night before. He searched for hours, walking slowly through tall grass, checking behind rocks, looking carefully into small streams. Just as he began to feel discouraged, thinking perhaps the star had simply been his imagination, he noticed something unusual: a small, smooth, silver stone, resting quietly in a patch of soft grass, warm to the touch despite the cool morning air. Emile picked it up carefully, turning it over gently in his small hands. It did not look exactly like he imagined a fallen star would look, but something about it felt special, important. He carried the stone carefully back to his grandmother's house, eager to show her his discovery. "Grandmother," he said breathlessly, "I found it! I found the fallen star!" His grandmother, an old woman with kind, wise eyes, examined the small silver stone carefully. "This is a beautiful stone indeed," she said gently. "Whether it truly fell from the sky, or has simply rested in that field for many years, only the earth itself truly knows." "But can I still make a wish on it?" Emile asked eagerly. His grandmother smiled warmly. "Of course you can," she said. "But let me share a secret with you about wishes, one that took me many years to fully understand myself." Emile listened closely, holding the small stone carefully in his hands. A wish, his grandmother said, is not magic that changes the world around you by itself. Instead, a wish is a way of clearly naming what your heart truly desires. Once you name it clearly, honestly to yourself, you begin, often without even realizing it, working gently toward making that wish become real, through your own small, patient actions, day by day. Emil thought carefully about what he truly wished for. After a long, quiet moment, he finally spoke. "I wish," he said softly, "that I could become someone who helps other people, the way you help our whole village, grandmother." His grandmother's eyes grew warm and proud. "That is a beautiful wish," she said. "And I believe quite certainly that you already have exactly what is needed inside your own heart to make it come true. Patiently, one small kind action at a time." From that day onward, Emil kept the small silver stone close to him, carrying it gently in his pocket as a quiet reminder of his wish. And slowly, over many years, he grew into exactly the kind of person he had wished to become that morning. Patient, kind, always ready to help his neighbors, his friends, and eventually, his entire village. Many years later, when Emil had grown old himself, with children and grandchildren of his own, he still kept that same small silver stone on his windowsill, and on clear summer nights, he often sat outside with his own grandchildren, watching the stars together, telling them the same old story his grandmother once told him. "Do you think it really was a fallen star?" his youngest granddaughter once asked him curiously. Emil smiled warmly, looking up at the bright, scattered stars above them. "It does not matter anymore whether it truly fell from the sky," he said gently. "What matters is the wish it helped me name clearly, all those years ago, and the patient, quiet work of becoming that wish, one small day at a time. Let us stay a little longer in the quiet farming village before we finally settle into sleep tonight." Many years after that summer morning when young Emil first found the small silver stone, he had grown into an old man himself, his once dark hair now completely silver, much like the stone he still kept carefully on his windowsill. One evening, his youngest granddaughter, the same curious girl who once asked whether the stone truly fell from the sky, came to him with a heavy heart. "Grandfather," she said, sitting beside him on the porch as the sun began setting over the wide fields, "I do not know what to wish for anymore. I used to want so many things, but now, everything feels uncertain and confusing." Emil listened patiently, remembering clearly his own confusion as a young boy, uncertain what to wish for beneath that same wide, star-filled sky so many years before. "Let me share something else my own grandmother once taught me," he said gently, "something I did not fully understand myself until I had lived many more years." His granddaughter looked up at him curiously. "Wishes," Emil said slowly, "do not need to remain the same throughout our entire lives. When I was young, I wished to become someone who helps others, and I spent many years working patiently toward that single wish. But as I grew older, married, raised children, and grew old myself, new wishes quietly emerged within me too. Wishes for peace, wishes for gratitude, wishes simply to appreciate each ordinary, beautiful day as it comes." "How do you know which wish is right?" she asked. Emil smiled warmly, placing a gentle, wrinkled hand over her own. "You do not always know immediately," he said, "but if you stay patient and pay close attention to your own quiet heart, the right wish for this particular moment in your life will slowly become clear, just as that small silver stone slowly became visible to me all those years ago, once I stopped rushing and started looking carefully." His granddaughter thought about his words quietly, watching the sun continue its slow, gentle descent behind the distant hills. "What do you wish for now, grandfather?" she finally asked. At this point in your life, Emil considered the question carefully before answering. "Right now," he said softly, "my wish is simply this, that you and your own children someday will learn to look up at that same wide, star-filled sky and find your own quiet wishes there, exactly as I once did, exactly as my own grandmother once taught me." His granddaughter smiled, leaning her head gently against his shoulder as the first stars began appearing softly in the darkening sky above the quiet fields. "I think," she said slowly, "my wish right now is simply to remember this exact moment, with you, for as long as I possibly can." Emil's eyes grew warm and gentle. "That," he said softly, "is perhaps the most beautiful wish I have ever heard." They sat together quietly as the stars slowly filled the darkening sky above them, grandfather and granddaughter, sharing a peaceful, comfortable silence beneath the same patient, ancient stars that had watched over their entire family for so many generations, and would continue watching, faithfully, for many generations still to come. Tonight, if you have any quiet wish resting gently in your own heart, let yourself name it clearly, honestly, just as young Emil once did beneath a wide, star-filled sky. You do not need a fallen star, or any magic at all. You only need patience, and small, gentle steps, taken one at a time. Let that quiet wish rest peacefully in your heart tonight, warm and safe, as you finally drift, slowly and gently, into a deep and peaceful sleep. There is one final quiet memory from the wide farming fields worth sharing before we finally rest tonight. Many years after that gentle evening on the porch, Emil's granddaughter, now grown into a thoughtful young woman herself, returned to the family farm carrying her own small daughter, only 3 years old, eager to continue the same quiet tradition passed down so faithfully through her family. On a warm summer evening, much like the one she remembered so clearly from her own childhood, she carried the small silver stone, still carefully preserved, out to the same wide field where her grandfather had first discovered it, so many decades before. This stone, she told her small daughter gently, kneeling beside her in the soft evening grass, belonged to your great-grandfather. He found it in this very field when he was just a young boy, and it taught him something very important about wishes. Her small daughter looked at the smooth silver stone with wide, curious eyes, too young yet to fully understand its deeper meaning, but old enough to sense its quiet importance. As the sky slowly darkened above them, and the first scattered stars began appearing softly overhead, she gently guided her daughter's small hand toward the sky. "Someday," she whispered warmly, "when you are a little older, you will understand what your great-grandfather once taught me, that wishes are simply quiet promises we make gently to our own hearts, promises we keep patiently, one small, gentle step at a time." Her small daughter smiled sleepily, nestling comfortably against her mother's side, watching quietly as the darkening sky above the wide, peaceful fields slowly filled with countless soft, scattered stars, exactly as it always had, and exactly as it always would, patiently watching over each new generation of their family, faithfully, for so many years still to come. One final small detail from the wide farming fields deserves a quiet mention before we finally rest tonight. The small silver stone, carried so carefully through so many generations of Emil's family, eventually found a permanent home in a small glass case on the farmhouse windowsill, passed faithfully from parent to child, each new generation adding their own quiet wish to a small notebook kept respectfully beside it. Visitors to the farm, distant cousins and old family friends alike, often paused quietly beside that small window, reading gently through the notebook's gathered pages, each simple wish a quiet thread connecting one generation faithfully to the next, beneath the very same patient, star-filled sky that had watched over their family for so long, and would continue watching, faithfully, for so very long still to come. Good night, my friend. Rest well. Tomorrow is a brand new day, waiting patiently for you, exactly like the sun waits patiently behind the quiet night sky.